Yep.
Okay. One sec.
Now, should I mention that Joe bailed at the last minute? I have it written in the notes in a nice way, but I don't know if I should even mention it. That's not really standard for us.
Well, anybody who's watching is going to hear it while two of us have ran off. We're streaming. I don't even have Audacity started yet.
Well, Norbert said he needed a glass of water. I thought it took more to cool down than that, but
oh, crap! I ain't got my headphones on. Wow, we're just.
I don't have Audacity open. Yeah.
I've got Audacity ready to go, but that's just me. I'm in
We're
practice,
streaming.
man.
That's all that matters.
We are streaming. Have we posted a link anywhere?
Not yet. Hang on.
Hello, nobody who is listening to us because they don't know we're here.
Well, if they're not, if they don't know that we stream at 3:00 on Sundays by now, I dare say we don't have much chance for the future.
Now I have hiccups. Whoopee.
Was that? Do it again, Moss. Do it again. That was excellent. All right, hang on. I'll do a.
Hello.
Hello.
Okay.
Okay. Shareable link. All right. Discord. Where's Discord? That's over on this monitor. Okay. Where do we want to put it? On the show announcements or in the public?
Well, Joe usually does both, and also the Telegram.
Gotcha. Public. Show announcements.
I have new unreads. You must have done something.
Yeah, dude, I am a social networking. Well, no, I'm not much of any.
Yeah, well, what the noun is what makes that sentence work. So if you drop the noun, we don't know what you're talking about.
I was trying to come up with something ridiculous, but it just didn't happen.
Sort of like listening to the old Ted Kennedy speeches. He always seemed to not be able to find the verb he wanted.
It always seemed like somebody was interrupting him in the middle of the speech or something. I don't know. All right. So
I'm back.
We're on the socials. We are streaming. The only thing left is to get the Audacity.
Audacity.
Did you get it to Telegram as well?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
I think. I hope.
Yep, I see it. Yeah.
Okay.
Everyone ready on Audacity?
Ready?
Yep.
All right. Well, we got a 3, 2, 1 record coming up here.
Oh,
I hear spring noise.
that clanging sound. Yeah.
Almost done. Okay.
Okay. 3, 2, 1, record. Traffic's pretty quiet on 61 today. Had a couple cars whoosh by, but no big trucks or anything.
I heard nothing from anybody.
All right.
Yeah, because Bill is off.
Let's do a 0. 3, 2, 1, 0.
0.
And we're only 6 minutes late. Should we get this show on the road?
Let's do it.
Ready.
Oh, I love doing that on the mic. That throws the balance off.
Yeah, I have an angel sitting on my shoulder telling me to try to imitate the British accent, to try to learn to speak English in a more British accent because it looks nicer. But I also have the devil on my shoulder, which is telling me just use the American pronunciation because it is way easier to say mobile than to say mobile for you anyway. But one thing that I don't negotiate with and I really like to not mess up is pronouncing Linus as Linus.
You mean
I learned by
Linus?
mistake. Yeah, that one.
Well, Linus, actually, but that's okay. He doesn't get upset about any of it.
Or if I wanted to be more precise, I could use apparently this Finnish pronunciation is Ines.
Okay, Norbert, let's go. Welcome to mintCast, the podcast by the Linux Mint community for all users of Linux. I'm Moss.
I'm
Norbert.
Bill.
Wait, should you start? You don't have an introduction line, Moss.
All right, I'm Moss.
I'm Bill.
I'm Norbert.
And I'm Josh T. No relation to Ice.
This is episode 384. This is episode 384.5. Recorded on Sunday, the 3rd of April, 2022. Livestream information is at mintcast.org/livestream. If you see something you'd like to hear about, tell us. Send us email at mintcast@mintcast.org. Join us live on YouTube. Post to the mintcast subreddit. Chat with us on Telegram, Discord, and mintcast.org. Join us live on YouTube. Post at the mintcast/mintcast.org.
Well, somebody did post on the mintcast subreddit.
Yes, they did.
And it ended up being interesting.
We'll get there. Slow your roll. Everyone should have their mics shut until I tell them to. Okay. First up in the news. Google has an NVMe problem. Arch has a new installer. Deepin unlocks your face. Fedora and Ubuntu have betas, and they both default to Wayland on NVIDIA. And mintCast gets the April Fool's treatment. In security and privacy, Red Hat has an eye patch. Another kernel vulnerability found, and Lumen finds more threats in WSL. Then in our wanderings, I'm in reconstruction again. Bill is driving himself crazy. Josh is getting steamy, and Norbert did some things. In our innards section, we discuss some of the newer additions to Linux and what we think about them. And finally, the feedback and a couple of suggestions. We expected Joe here, but he got called away at the last minute. Wish you were here, Joe. I see nobody has picked items. Do I have to read it all?
I'll go ahead and do the first one if you want.
Okay. The news.
Google has a problem with Linux server reboots due to too many NVMe drives. This is from Phoronix. Hyperscaler problems these days. Linux servers taking too long to reboot due to having too many NVMe drives. Thankfully, Google is working on an improvement to address. This is where some of their many drive servers can take more than 1 minute for the Linux kernel to carry out its shutdown tasks. Due to the synchronous nature during the shutdown handling, each NVMe drive can take about 4 to 5 seconds to shut down. With Google servers now having 16 plus NVMe drives or devices, this can make an extra minute to shut down and go through the reboot phase. The proposed patches from Google allow for an optional asynchronous shutdown interface at the bus level. The new interface maintains backwards compatibility with the synchronous implementation. As part of all these patches, all PCI Express-based devices are moved to use the async interface. Implements the changes at the PCI level, and then changes the NVMe driver to exploit the async shutdown interface.
Not so easy to read, is it, Bill?
We're getting there.
Good
This
morning,
issue Google-
everybody.
This issue Google has, it's the epitome of suffering from success.
Yeah, they were talking about this on, was it Linux Action News? That was the first I heard about it. And I didn't know that this was a problem, but I tried it out in a server of my own making, and yeah, in fact, they shut down one after the other, which maybe nobody thought of that. Maybe it just wasn't a problem until recently. I don't know.
Now I wonder, I have 2 NVMe drives, so should I theoretically experience maybe a 2 to 5 second decrease in shutdown times?
Well, I mean, if you need that time back in your life, yeah, I think it only really becomes a problem at large scale where you've got these people like Google that have got large online resources, where they need things to shut down and reboot as quick as possible.
A shutdown job is running 2 seconds out of unlimited time.
Yeah, I don't know, but here we are speaking, from our computers that have 2 or 3 drives. You got a server that's got 16 of them running. Maybe it is an issue, I guess. I didn't even know it was a thing.
Yeah, especially when you have those massive server farms in these buildings. I can imagine that in aggregate, that's probably a lot of time.
Server farms are where servers are raised. But moving on.
Free-range servers.
Yeah. Improved Arch Linux installer experience to come with Arch Install 2.4. This is from Phoronix. Debuting a year ago was the Arch install script as a way to carry out quick and easy installations of Arch Linux. The text user interface is very easy to use and provides some levels of defaults. Arch Install 2.4 is being prepared as the next feature update and is working on a completely new TUI, terminal user interface, which is I recently learned is not the same as CLI, command line interface, because I think a command line interface is just when it puts out lines of text, but a TUI is something like HTOP it's not just lines of text, you can even interact it, so it's an interactive output. For example, like Anchor's installers, like that of Debian's, which is similar to this one. So this also looks like one of those installers when you can use the keyboard to go and select options. So it looks way more intuitive than the previous one.
Yeah, like a TUI gives you like up and down functionality, and then hit the enter button to, connect the things as though they were graphical.
So this is like in curses?
In curses, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I think it says the new menu system is making use of simple turn menu, so I'm not sure if it's Anchor's, but it's something really similar. This new version also has improvements to the Btrfs file system handling code that can now allow for more complex layouts and specifying Btrfs transparent file system compression options and the no data copy on write mode. So basically you can create and mount subvolumes as well, which I think it couldn't do before. Arch Install 2.4 also has many API additions and improvements for those carrying out Python scripting around this Arch Linux installer. Fun fact, the very, very early versions of Arch Linux used to have an installer, but it got deprecated because I think they didn't want to maintain it, or they had troubles maintaining it. So for many years, the status quo for Arch has been you have to just install it manually. But I think I'm more and more on board with this script being a thing, especially if it's becoming better and better, because you can learn a lot by installing Arch manually, but the
problem with a graphical installer on Arch is that you got 2 choices. Either you provide an installer that gives you some very basic functionality. It gives you options to do an installation one or a few ways, or else you just don't have one at all. Because the problem with it on Arch is that people that use Arch, and myself included, we have so many esoteric, so many individual ways of setting up our partitions and our subvolumes on Btrfs. That's one of the biggest problems I had with a graphical installer, is that I like to make my own partition scheme, my own subvolume scheme, that kind of thing. And then there's a lot of things I like to choose. And you also have to, when it's time to bootstrap all of your initial packages, you have to actually choose what type of kernel you're going to use, whether it's the LTS kernel or the base kernel or you've got a few choices right there from the repo.
Zen, but the Arch
Zen,
script does give you the choice between the 3 kernels.
Yeah, I can just imagine though in the beginning that might have been you either had to make this huge complicated thing with all of these options built into it, or else you had to make something that just gave you a base install of Arch with a ext4 partition scheme, like most distros do. And
Well,
then,
look at the installer on Calculate and don't copy that one.
is that a bad? I've never tried Calculate. Is that a bad one?
Calculate has a very in-depth, very detailed installer that sounds like it's completely understandable, and by the time you're done, you've messed up something.
Was it an Anaconda installer?
Nope, they wrote their own.
No, someone described Anaconda as like the Anaconda installer as like a choose your own adventure game, or
Yeah.
what is a sort of RPG game, but just
Well, Anaconda, I don't understand, and they still make the wrong decisions.
It's
Calculate sounds perfectly understandable, and you think you know what you're doing, and when you're done, you did something wrong, and there's no way to get it right other than go back and start over.
I think for a distro like Arch, though, Anaconda might have been a good way to go because you do have the opportunity to add. You can either leave it, with something basic that everybody's used to, or you can add features and options for a more customized install.
Well, Arco uses Calamaris, and they have a beginning and an expert version of it, and you pick what you're doing, and it's still Calamaris, but you have all the options you need.
Yeah.
So no one's going to address the elephant in the room and ask if you use a script to get Arch on your system, do you still get the street cred to be able to say, I use Arch, by the way?
Well, no, not once they find out. But you can lie, but you're just lying to yourself about what you really are.
Well, if everyone who uses Arch does that, then it's the common experience.
You might as well go use Manjaro at that point. Oops.
Yeah.
Oh.
All right, let's wrap that one up.
Well, I have two things to add to this.
You go, boy.
One thing is that I am a really big advocate of having a beginner and an advanced option.
Yeah.
In installers, in every settings, everywhere. But my number one gripe with Anaconda. Sorry. But my number one gripe with Anaconda is that in partitioning they have three modes. They have the easy mode, the advanced, and an even more advanced mode. But ironically, at least for me, the easy mode is the most confusing because it has this really weird interface. That's really the only thing I don't get about Anaconda. And funnily enough, out of the two advanced options, the more advanced options seems more straightforward. It resembles a classical, just a list of partitions on the disk, and you create partitions sort of paradigm. But with the Arch install script, I will probably still continue to just install Arch manually when I need it, partly because I just wrote my own script for it, but also because there's I don't use Btrfs or any sort of advanced or esoteric way of snapshotting and stuff, but I don't like the fact that at least in the earlier versions, Arch install insisted on mounting the EFI partition on /boot and not /boot/EFI.
Yeah.
Which is very odd to me. Because I don't want my kernel.
Which is not an option if you're going to install this next to Windows, because Windows only creates like 100 megabyte EFI system partition. If you're going to use that, then you have to mount that within the boot partition. That way, you've got somewhere else to put the.
Or maybe I'm wrong because
is your friend.
Yeah.
You go in, you shrink the Windows partition to the right, and you make that.
For God's sake, yeah! But there's also another partition between the EFI and the rest of the Windows partition. So you got to not only shrink the Windows partition, move it to the right.
That one, yeah.
Then you've got to move that other one. Next thing you know, you've dislocated Windows, and it's not going to work right.
But Windows has one of the Windows extra partitions is unmovable.
And that's the other thing. I just don't screw around with
that.
But
now I'm not sure. I'm not sure if Arch puts the kernel on the EFI partition because it does.
No, it doesn't.
Arch install specifically because I know that Popo has complaints about if the EFI partition being too small, but I don't know if I've seen something similar with Arch install.
I haven't tried it yet. I know that I always give the EFI its own partition inside of the boot partition, and then I just make the boot partition part of the
root
partition. That way I just don't have to worry about whether or not it's got enough space, because if you leave it to its own device, I think even if you do a stock, like the Mint install on my virtual machines gave the EFI its own partition, and then the kernel got written to the boot partition outside of that.
Yeah, I don't generally like the idea of the kernel itself living on the EFI partition, because if something happens, let's say to the EFI partition, it's just gone for some reason. If the kernel is on the root partition, you can still get your system to boot via some other bootloader you get from somewhere. But if your kernel is gone, then you most likely would have to reinstall. Or I'm sure there's a way to get the kernel, to recover the kernel, but I would
also,
have to look it up.
From a dual booting perspective, you don't want to put that anywhere where Windows can get at it too.
Oh no, I have two different EFI partitions.
Well, I mean, if you didn't do that though, if you had one EFI partition that both Windows and Linux was using, and you had the kernel on that, then Windows, at some point, if it didn't like something being there besides an EFI stub, then it could erase it, and then you got.
I think Windows just sometimes likes to reformat the entire EFI partition with no regard to what
it's just not a good
actually
idea
on it.
But anyway, moving on.
Yep. Okay. DeepinOS becomes the first Linux distro to offer face unlock from its FOSS. China-based Deepin developers have released version 20.5, and its main highlight is facial recognition. The stable kernel version is now upgraded to 5.15.24 with several bug fixes. Deepin is now offering the face-based biometric authentication method. It should work on laptops with built-in webcams. Once you enroll your face in the control center, you can log into the system with your Face ID from the next time onwards. Other changes include an easier way of sending user feedback in their app store, custom folder management in the Deepin Mail app, and a pinned screenshots feature so that the captured screenshot remains on top of other application windows.
Yeah, no, that's scary to me. I don't like that at all.
But you don't want to give your face to a Chinese company's distribution?
To really anyone. I mean, it's scary enough looking at it in the mirror. I don't want to inflict it on anyone else.
Yeah, I've got facial recognition on my Lenovo tablet, but it doesn't work that well, and I usually just hit my buttons to log in. Yeah.
Is it Android?
Yeah, Android. It just got updated to 10.
I saw this piece of news, and I saw that the publication date was April 1st. So I almost didn't include it because I thought it was just an April 1st joke, but I looked it up and multiple pages had the same news, so I assume it's genuine.
The Chinese government wants you to think it's April Fool's.
Ah.
Okay, Norbert.
Fedora 36 and Ubuntu 22.04 LTS betas have now been released. This is from 9to5Linux. Both distributions will ship with GNOME Shell version 42, although Ubuntu will not have the newest versions of those GNOME applications. I will restart the entire sentence, sorry. Both distributions will ship with GNOME Shell version 42, although Ubuntu will not have the latest versions of those GNOME applications that have been ported to GTK4, and instead ship with slightly older GNOME 41 versions. Except for those where the 42 version hasn't been ported to GTK4 at all. For example, Nautilus, the file manager. An interesting thing to note is that while the long-awaited triple buffering feature, which should improve performance significantly, wasn't ready for GNOME 42 and therefore it won't be included in Fedora 36, Ubuntu 22.04 will include it in the form of a patch, which is what we referred to as Ubuntu out Fedoring Fedora previously. Ubuntu 22.04 will also feature accent colors, which is another long-awaited feature. Ubuntu 22.04 is expected to release on April 21st, while Fedora 36 on April 26th, if everything goes well. I think Fedora's original release date was planned to be April 19th, but it was pushed back by 1 week. Which usually happens, but it's also a good sign because they don't want to release it if they're not absolutely sure that it's ready, and all blocker bugs have been
I was just playing with both of these betas this morning, and they both look pretty good. There's still some paper cuts in Ubuntu that need to be ironed out. I noticed the Snap Store is still only showing Snap packages. And
that's not a bug, that's a feature.
You're right. And yeah, the
I'm
icons
sorry,
on
Snap
the
is
desktop.
a bug.
Yeah, the icons on the desktop didn't resize when you tried to resize your icons. Only the ones in the sidebar did. So they still have a little work ahead of them, but it's looking good in my opinion.
I'm pretty sure on Distro Hoppers we're going to do an all Ubuntu episode in probably June.
After the first point release comes out?
No, after the whole thing comes out, because we have to have a whole month to work on the distro.
Oh, yeah.
So everyone picks a different flavor of Ubuntu?
Probably. Knowing me, I'll probably pick an unofficial one.
Which one?
Well, I am very much friends with the guy that does Ubuntu Unity. Let's see. I guess Budgie has become official.
Hasn't.
Cinnamon too.
Cinnamon is official now?
Oh no, it's not official. It's still a remix.
Mm-hmm.
What about?
But it's out there.
What about what was it called?
Probably
the i3.
DDE. Probably DDE is where I would go. DDE or Unity.
Were
Is
you
Regolith official?
referencing Regolith?
Yeah, is that official yet?
Would I care?
Well, I mean, if anybody wants to
Think it
learn
is.
i3, if you got a system you're really trying to get the most out of, i3 is a way to laser narrow down the resources of your machine to the application you're running.
Yeah, I am happy with Bodhi, thank you.
Regolith combines GNOME with i3. But we should also probably mention Ubuntu Rolling Rhino Remix, which recently has, I think it's a different approach with the same name, but it's essentially a unofficial Ubuntu remix that turns Ubuntu into a rolling release distro by tracking the development branch.
Yeah, Martin Wimpress started that, but I don't know who's running it now.
Yeah, use at your own risk. I don't know. Kind of defeats the purpose of Ubuntu, if you ask me. But I guess if you want to live on the or closer to the edge, anyway.
I guess it's the equivalent of running Debian Seed, for Ubuntu.
I think that's
some people run Debian Seed.
They do.
Well, let's follow up with what they're doing to Wayland now.
Okay, so Ubuntu 22.04 LTS will default to Wayland with the NVIDIA proprietary driver, and this is from Phoronix. Ubuntu has been defaulting to GNOME on Wayland since 21.04 for Intel and AMD Radeon graphics. However, the NVIDIA proprietary driver has continued defaulting to the Xorg session. Over the past several months, NVIDIA has been working to address bugs in their Wayland support, and most notably, having implemented generic buffer management (GBM) support within their walled garden. The NVIDIA 510 series driver especially is in good shape for Wayland, and especially with the well-tested GNOME Mutter Wayland compositor. The caveat is that it's only the case when using the NVIDIA 510 driver or newer, and not when using any of the older legacy driver branches. And I'm AMD, so I can't really comment on this one.
I'm NVIDIA, and every time I see something related to Wayland and NVIDIA, I just put it in the show notes. And one important thing, that Fedora 36 will do the same. So both of these distros, the two big distros that have this 6-month release schedule, the new versions in April will both default to Wayland on NVIDIA, which will be interesting to see. I assume it will break functionality for a couple of people, but that in the long run, that should just improve and benefit Wayland development.
Okay, well, I'm anti-GNOME, so I'm not going to care about that either.
Are you anti-GNOME, or are you just indifferent about GNOME?
I was going to ask the same thing.
I'm anti-GNOME, I'm anti-XFCE, I'm indifferent about Cinnamon, I am indifferent
XFCE is really close, similar to Cinnamon.
I love all the open source projects. I just don't necessarily use them all.
Okay. Well, anyhow. We should not question our ethics here, people.
I'm not questioning my ethics. I'm questioning yours.
Accept me as I am, people. That's what you get.
I do. I love you, Moss.
Can you feel the love? Can
Love
you
it.
feel it?
Okay, we got a little elephant of our own here. mintCast April Fools. On April 1st, a post appeared from Sid32 on the mintCast subreddit announcing that mintCast is moving to Spotify exclusively. This is not the case. We do not know who Sid32 is. It might be a alias for someone that is on the team, but nobody named Sid32 is on the team. So it probably was intended as an April Fool's joke, and it had to be addressed just in case someone didn't get it.
I don't know what it would take to get us to move to Spotify exclusively,
Well,
but
probably Spotify approaching us themselves with the good
offering
contract.
us enough money to retire on.
That's it, with a
It'd be
big
real-
stack of cash.
It'd be real
You
hard.
really think I would sell out? You
Oh,
really,
gosh. I don't know,
might
Moss.
quit the show, but I won't sell out.
We'd have to make another show just so we can have Moss on, but I got to tell you,
Right.
Spotify, if you're listening,
Everybody's got a price,
I'm not
Moss.
saying we've got a price. I'm not saying we don't.
Well,
I'm cheap.
you can tell our price because we don't run any ads.
Right.
And
But
every time we mention something, we have to say, we are not sponsored by.
No, we're just
Okay.
dumb enough to do it all for free.
yeah, we
It's
give up
getting
our
too
weekends.
giggly around here. Let's move on.
All right.
Security and privacy update. Josh, did you want to start out here?
Sure. Red Hat released a patch for recently discovered vulnerability that allowed for local privilege escalation, putting all manner of Linux systems potentially at risk, and this is from TechRadar. As explained in the advisory, the vulnerability, tracked as CVE-2022-27666, scary number there, was discovered in IPsec encapsulating security payload, or ESP6, crypto module, or in other words, a basic heap overflow vulnerability. The flaw was discovered by one, I'm going to butcher this, Jianchen Zhu, a graduate.
I'd say Shaoshenzhou.
Shaoshenzhou. All right, thank you. My Chinese is not great. Graduate student at the University of California, Riverside. He explained how the basic logic of this vulnerability is that the receiving buffer of a user message in ESP6 module is an 8-page buffer, but the sender can send a message larger than 8 pages, which clearly creates a buffer overflow. In Red Hat's advisory, the flaw was described as allowing a threat actor with normal user privilege to overwrite kernel heap objects, which may cause local privilege escalation. The vulnerability was given a severity score of 7.8. So that's fairly high.
Ooh. Wait a minute, this isn't Halloween. Norbert, you want to do the next one?
Yeah.
Okay, do it.
There's been another vulnerability in the Linux kernel. This is from Linux Addicts. The vulnerability is CVE 2022-0995 and is present in the event tracking subsystem watch_q, and this causes data to be written to an area of kernel memory outside of the allocated buffer. The attack can be carried out by end users without privileges and have their code executed with kernel privileges. It was solved with a change added to the kernel on March 11th. So when they say kernel privileges, is that even higher than root privileges?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. But I think the vast majority of these very bad vulnerabilities we hear about are locally exploitable. So what will be really bad is that something similar comes out and it's remotely executable.
Yeah, absolutely. If you have to have local access to the machine, that's another story, But if it's remote
Yeah,
executable,
yeah. You
don't
would
be
have to
mad.
break into a server farm, which is not as easy. So as long as you don't leave your computer unattended somewhere where you don't trust people with your computer, you should be fine.
Yeah, don't use 123 as your password.
Don't even use 1, 2, 3, 4.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Yes, but
Password.
I think most services require you to have at least 8 characters.
Well, tack password on at the end or the beginning.
Yeah, but if you're smart, you use something like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9. You just leave out 8. It's the
Yeah,
ultimate
good
Leaving out
security.
one
Good
number
security.
adds years of entropy to that number. Yeah.
And then run it through a hash.
The way
All
I've had
right,
it, the way I've had it explained to me is anything a human can remember, a computer can. Anything a human can remember, a computer can hack in seconds. So,
well,
The longer the password, the less hackable it is.
I'm pretty confident in my passwords, but
Okay.
really,
yeah,
you
really.
heard it here, folks.
Norbert wants you to hack his passwords.
Somebody out there's going, oh yeah, click, 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 click.
And this is a good time to talk about our sponsor, Bitwarden.
Well, that's a
Lying,
sponsor I
I'm
wouldn't
lying.
mind having, but we don't.
Right.
Bill?
Okay, so Lumen security research reveals threats still lurk in Windows subsystem for Linux. Who would have thought? This is from Markets Insider. Last fall, Black Lotus Labs, the threat intelligence team at Lumen Technologies, discovered what had until then only been theorized. Linux binaries were being used as loaders in Windows Subsystem for Linux, otherwise known as WSL. Since then, the team has analyzed more than 100 samples that indicate the compatibility is evolving. Several of the samples leveraged custom-developed and open-source tools that could be used by actors to evade detection while gaining access to endpoints and computer networks. This new class of WSL-based attack demonstrates the blurring boundaries between operating systems, said Michael Lee, Director of Threat Intelligence at Black Lotus Labs.
I think Michelle would be upset about
Michelle
that.
Lee. Anyway, because the types of users running WSL tend to have greater network privileges. Organizations that use WSL as part of their day-to-day operations should take note to bolster their defenses as quickly as possible. And Michelle, if you are listening, I do apologize. Not good with names. In fact, by the end of this, I will have forgotten her name.
Does anybody use WSL here?
I've tried it. I don't have a real use for it.
No, but it was my gateway to Linux because we were told to install it for university, and I just moved to after a couple of weeks I just moved to an Ubuntu VM, and then I just moved to running Linux on hardware.
So WSL was your gateway drug.
Well, it
Parents
was more
don't
like
let your children use WSL.
It was more like a requirement for us to be able to pass the class. So was I forced into Linux? No.
You know,
You get that first taste, and
yeah.
you got to have another. Yeah.
You know, my first thought when they started talking about graphical applications on WSL and things like that, I thought, well, I'm not sure what the use is because most of these graphical applications that we like the most, the good ones, actually have Windows ports. But then I went and looked at some of the Windows ports to some of the graphical applications that I like to use on Linux, and in order to get them, you're steered towards some repository somewhere on SourceForge, or what's that other one, CNET, or what's a popular one out there? Anyway, you go to install. Let's take a good one. The worst one was FileZilla. That's one I like to use on Linux. And if anybody's not aware, that is a application for moving files back and forth onto a FTP or an SFTP server. And I use that a lot to move stuff on and off the Jellyfin server. Well, the Windows port, when you download it, it's one of those applications that tries to sneak in other little silly, I call them malware level applications, to try to sell you things and that. And here it is, this open source application that's, if you're not watching what you're doing, they employ actually 3 different methods of trying to sneak things past somebody, because Windows users are so used to that next type user interaction when they're installing software, and that's how they sneak some of these, the toolbars for the browsers and things like that are watching some of the things. Go get the application and install it. You'll see what I'm talking about. So if anybody was coming and they were just using Windows and they tried to install some of the software that we're used to using on Linux, they might have a bad experience with it. So enter WSL and their ability to install graphical applications directly from Ubuntu and Fedora repositories. That's probably a cleaner way of getting some of the open source software if you're forced to use Windows in a corporate.
I think it's mainly for being able to develop Linux ports of your own applications and being able to test and run them on Windows.
They use it for a lot of different things, but I think if you were on Windows, a later version of Windows, and you wanted to use open source applications, it might be a better way to get them than the Windows ports that are out there, just because they seem to be distributed with some pretty less than savory means, in my opinion.
No, I wonder if...
I mean, how do you live without the Yahoo addition to your toolbar? I mean, you gotta have it.
Yahoo's one thing. Oh gosh, have you ever seen people, especially in the old IE days, when they would tell you that their computer was running slow, and you go and look, and they would have like toolbars lined up under their IE taskbar, covering a third of the screen, and you're like, well, I think I've zeroed in on one problem, right away.
Oh yeah.
And it's all because they're fully aware that people have gotten comfortable with the whole next, click, because they just want their thing that they wanted to install. They didn't want to take the time to read everything, and they're aware of that, and that's how they sneak these little things like those toolbars in. It was real bad in the old days.
Well, why don't we next click to our wanderings?
Well, okay.
Oh, nice segue, Moss.
Yeah.
Whoa, I tried. Did I step on you, Bill?
No,
Okay.
You were the one that was worried this wasn't going to be long enough, so I'm just saying.
No. I'm not worried whether it's not going to be long enough. I'm about whether I fall over my tongue from not having text to read.
Okay.
Anyhow.
I'll give you something to read. It might not be text, though.
Yeah, well. Okay, be nice.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Bi-weekly wanderings. Well, in my life, we got our car back from the shop. Cost a lot of money, but we got it back. Distro Hoppers Digest was a lot of fun, but it is getting longer. We have added Josh Hawk to the team. While recording Distro Hoppers, my Audacity, while still recording, jumped back to the beginning of my recorded audio and started playing it simultaneously. This had me listening to my own already recorded audio from the beginning, and it put too much of a strain on my system, so Josh, who was talking at the time, was breaking up like crazy. I had to stop Audacity, go to the end of what I had recorded, and start the recording from there, and then when it was time for me to talk again, we did another zero sync. So it all worked out in the end. I think some of you have commented on enjoying the latest episode, and I appreciate that.
Yes, I haven't finished it, but I started listening to it. Do you perhaps have another opening position vacancy on this ropers?
It could be. The problem that we're having at Distro Hoppers is Tony is both a co-host and our editor, and he can't sit in a chair for very long. So we were very happy when we were keeping it 45 minutes to an hour, and now they're going hour and a quarter, hour and a half. And if we added another person, it'd be longer than that, and we'd start getting into mintCast.
So I guess I could just be on the bench in case someone is not available.
Yeah, we're not sure whether Josh Hawk will be able to continue. He is trying to get a real job, and he may not have the what it takes to say, "Hey, I need to be off one Wednesday morning a month." Anyhow, I had a mess up on my. I'll keep that in mind, Norbert, and I'll bring it up to the team. I had a mess up on my testing computer's drives. Farron OS on SDB2 refused to boot, and then Mint on SDA1 started booting to black screen. I found that SDB was formatted MS-DOS instead of GBT, and I decided to start over on SDB, formatting, installing, etc. Then Farron OS installed an LMDE booted init RAMFS, which is what Farron OS was doing before. After futzing around trying to fix Mint, I just reinstalled Mint, which oddly resulted in a grub issue, but worked. For some reason, it wanted to install a 32-bit grub for Mint, and that messed up everything because then I couldn't grab the grub back to another distro. In the end, I installed 4 distros a total of 5 times, got everything working, but my next boot to LMDE last night, after finishing all my configuring and waiting a day, resulted in an init RAMFS prompt again, so I'm not done yet. I'm supposed to know all this stuff. Been doing this forever. I'm the closest thing to an expert on installing OSs that I know.
I think you need like a machine, maybe just has Windows, because the majority of people, if they're going to dual boot, which is important for your show because you've got that one of your categories is playing well with others.
I need Windows?
Well, that's the majority of people that go to install Linux distribution. If they're going to be dual booting at all, they're not going to be booting alongside other Linux distributions. They're going to be dual booting alongside Windows. That's the most likely scenario for most people, I think. I could be wrong, but I think that's probably true. So what you need is a machine that just has Windows on it, and then you can throw these distributions on it and see how they play alongside Windows.
I have enough headaches with Linux multi-boots.
Oh, I didn't say use the Windows, just have it there. Because I've literally never, I've been using Linux for 20 years. I've never had a machine with more than one Linux distro on the root.
Well, shame on you.
Yeah, I mean, that's what virtual machines is for me. But I appreciate in your case, you need to be able to test all these out. I don't know.
Yeah.
My general good advice.
I would rather just run everything on Bodhi, but there's a lot of quirks to E17 that I haven't figured out yet.
Like what, for example?
My general good advice
I'm still answering a question, Norbert. When I go to do a configuration, you have to find where the blanket is. The configuration on E17 is really, really complex, and they use a lot of the same types of words to say something different.
Yeah.
Also, I've been having a lot of trouble with my dialog boxes popping up under the window I'm using instead of over, and I can't figure that one out. Okay, Norbert, you were saying?
My general good advice on any sort of dual booting or multi-booting is that make sure that if you have multiple disks, all your disks and everything is working using UEFI. Because I assume that most computers can handle both UEFI and legacy boot, and maybe they can even at the same time, so they can list the boot entries that some of them are UEFI, some of them are legacy. But when Moss said that he had trouble with Farron, I think one of the conclusions were that maybe the new version of Farron just doesn't like to play nice with legacy boot. So I would advise for anyone who wants to multi-boot distros or even dual boot Windows with Linux, just make sure that if your computer can do UEFI, that you are using UEFI, and your disk is and the partition table on your disk is a GPT table and not
My previous machines were all UEFI, and somebody convinced me I should be using Legacy Boot. So on this one, I'm using Legacy. And I listen to what people advise, but I'm getting conflicting advice now, and it's rough.
And in case someone has problems with Grub on UEFI, you could always give a try to systemd boot or refine, because there's a chance that your problems might go away. Yeah, I just had
knew
to.
he'd bring that
Shameless
up again,
plug.
yeah.
I just had to plug refine because it's the single
I
greatest
gotta
thing
try
I
that one
ever
of these
tried.
days.
Norbert is sponsored by Refine.
Well, I'm not. But
Well, the
Picking up
difference
a lot
I
of
noticed.
sponsors.
Yeah,
I'm
I
not
noticed.
saying I have a price, but I'm also not saying that I don't.
I think
Bill,
Refine
what you been up to?
Refine would probably enjoy being sponsored by mintCast, but that.
Bill,
that's
what
neither-
you been up to?
Oh, anyway, yeah. And if anybody's not aware, Moss does another podcast called Full Circle Weekly News, and let me go on record for saying that he's probably got the best, concise, right down to earth, right down to the measure reading of the news, what's important that's going on out there, of any news podcast out there. I just recently started listening to it full time.
Thank you, Bill. The check's in the mail.
I really enjoy it. Yeah, cha-ching. Anyway, so as for my part, work has been it's continued to be crazy as of late, and that's become the normal thing now. Since the last Saturday stream, a week and a day ago, I've been back and forth to Pittsburgh twice. For anybody that's not aware, I'm a truck driver by trade. I've been up to the Wisconsin Dales once, and out to Cape Girardeau, Missouri once. And much of that has been due to the fact that my regular dispatcher has been off for a week. And the guy that's been covering for him is actually one of the drivers that's out on light duty. Because he got hurt or something, though I don't know what that's all about, because he seems to walk around carrying a mug of coffee and at the shop just fine. Yeah, he's had me kind of behind the eight ball all week. You know, it's taken me 7 years to train the dispatcher I got, and then all of a sudden he's gone. And I don't think I got time to train this new guy. So that all being said, it hasn't been bad for earnings because I'm paid by the hour, but it was a bit tiring because most nights I didn't get home till one night I got home at 12:30, another night I got home at 3 in the morning, and then I had to go back out at 9 o'clock the next morning. Or, 9 o'clock later that morning, so, yeah. Linux-wise, I took my laptop with me all week with every intention, God help me, of working on the show notes for today's show, which just didn't happen. What I ended up doing was getting sidetracked, trying to find an alternative way to run my Nextcloud servers. As some might be aware, I've been using Nextcloud for some time for all my personal and family cloud needs. Lately, I've grown less and less comfortable with the idea of relying on the Nextcloud Snap. Now, it's not necessarily a technical decision because I just don't know the direction Snap is going. Because it's as far as Linux goes, Snap just seems to be kind of a black box in our world. You know, it just doesn't seem to be any wise old men out here anymore.
Well, the Snap backend is sort of like a black box because it's not open source.
Yeah, and you just don't have... And some of the people that used to advocate for it, the minute they left Canonical, and I'm not going to name any names, I don't think I need to, some of the people that used to advocate for it, the minute they left Canonical, they made it a point to make sure everybody knew that they were not only ditching snaps, but adding Flatpak support to their distributions, you know, so I don't know. Nobody will come out and say if that was a technical decision, a philosophical one, or what, you know. So, as time goes on, I've become less and less comfortable with the whole Snap thing. And to be honest, to get Snap to work in the way that I want it to, where the snap is running, but yet I want all my stuff stored on my big hard drives, which are separate from the partition that the snap is installed on. You have to do either a bind mount, or you got to tell ZFS where to physically mount the drive to, which in my opinion is kind of a hacky way of doing it. If it was any other type of container format, there are ways built in to expose the parts of the container that would be necessary to have write access to other drives. And with snaps, you have to do this hacky thing where you either do the bind mount or whatever. And they don't. The other problem is documentation, because that is one thing that is visibly absent from the documentation. Official documentation is how to handle exterior or storage that's outside of the partition that the snap is installed on, because snaps are running from this directory that's buried in your var directory. It's like var/snap/ nextcloud / current or common / nextcloud / data. And that's where they mount the storage directory, and that's where you would have to mount an external drive if you were going to use that. And that's a bit of a hack, in my opinion, and the snap is the only one that requires you to do that. Well, anyway, I've been looking at other ways to run that, and the Docker container is a compelling option, but if you're going to expose it to the internet, you have to run a separate container that's running an Nginx proxy server, reverse proxy, that you can attach another container to that's running all of the Let's Encrypt stuff to get you a TLS certificate to run an HTTPS domain name to, which is, in my opinion, that's just adding more complexity to the whole thing. So I've been working on installing it from scratch with some tutelage I've gotten from a couple of YouTube videos out there. I think that's going to be the direction I go with the one. I've actually run 2 Nextcloud servers. One I exposed to the internet. The other one I do not, which I'll get to here in a little bit when we get into our innards. But
and we may be asking you to do some things for the team in the future. I'll be discussing that down and check this out.
Yeah. For anybody that's not aware, we're discussing options for handling our document management in the future. We a peek behind the curtains. During the last half hour before the show, it's pretty common for us to all get on and do our show notes at the exact same time because reasons. But with Google ripping the rug out from under us, or presumably ripping the rug out from under us, we're not going to have the option to have free cloud storage the way we're used to doing it. We're considering the option of going with a self-hosted sort of thing, and that's the other reason that I've been working on trying to come up with something that I can share that'll make sense, that'll be accessible to everybody on the team. I mean, we don't need a lot. We just need something that we can upload our documents to, and it's how we collate all of our audio files, and then one person needs access to that too. Well, everybody needs access, but one person needs to be able to download that to make the audio only version of the show. So that's been one of the motivational factors behind me doing it. What was you going to say, Moss?
And we appreciate that, but why don't we move to page 6 and hear from Josh?
Okay.
Well, kind of piggybacking off Bill there, I've also been working a ton overtime lately. And I haven't been able to do much lately, tech-related or otherwise. I've just been too worn out by the time that I get home. Not that there aren't things to do, but I just haven't had the energy to get to most of them, because I'm getting old and tired. I did do a little work on my partner's computer, though she rarely uses it. I replaced her very dated monitor with my old one, which is still dated but less so. I also upgraded her Mint installation from 20.1 to 20.3 and it all went smoothly. And I replaced her failing keyboard and mouse with some extras I had, and those are working fine now too. My daughter, bless her, bought me Final Fantasy 1 from Steam, a game I absolutely loved on NES when I was younger, so I'm looking forward to playing it again when time permits. And my music collection continues to expand because I buy CDs like they're going out of style for some reason. This week's purchases include the new albums from the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Meshuggah, Satan, the band, Ghost, and Once Human, as well as a couple of older Exodus CDs, if anyone's familiar with any of them. And lastly, and unfortunately, due to some life circumstances and the limited amount of time I have, this will probably be my last episode on the podcast for the time being.
Boy, drop a bomb, why don't you?
I know it. I'm sorry, guys.
Yeah, that was visibly and probably strategically left out of the show notes.
Yeah, I didn't want to cause too much of a ruckus, I try not to cause ripples in the pond. Yeah. But I do plan on trying to be back when possible, but being a full-time co-host, it's just not going to be possible for a while. And I really like to thank all the other hosts, you guys, past and present, that have helped me out, and the listeners here for having me. I've really enjoyed the experience, and I've learned a lot along the way. So thank you all, and hope to be seeing you soon. And that's it for me. Norbert?
Yeah, well, some things happened, and I also did some things, but I'm mostly doing my work for my thesis in order to finally get my degree at the university. And I've been listening to a bunch of music while doing it. And I just want to give a shout out to the guitarist named Nick Johnston, whose music I've been listening to quite a lot these past few weeks. And I even have one of his albums. I've been to one of his concerts, and that was the first physical album that I ever bought, and he signed it. I didn't ask for it, and it kind of caught me by surprise. But then I realized, okay, I should try to collect signed albums. So this is why I usually only buy an album when I have the chance to sign it, in order to have some sort of rules in place, because otherwise I wouldn't know which album to get because my library of music on Tidal is quite large. I'm just really comfortable with using Tidal, or previously I used Spotify. Some people would argue that it's really nice to own your music, but I guess I don't want to own my music, just be able to listen to it, except when I have a physical copy, which I do like to have on CD, because I'm not really interested in vinyl. But something interesting that has been happening is April Fool's, and I only was fooled once, but it was a really rough one, because the evening before April 1st, I got an email from my VPN provider, which was not unusual because they do send regular newsletters, and they said that they are going to be acquired. And I was quite shocked, because I've been using that VPN for many years, and in their email they said they're going to be acquired, and I was, for a few seconds, I really was sort of a panic. Then I realized it was just an April Fool's joke. But thankfully that was really the only time that I was fooled by something. Something related to April 1st is the first time in the past 5 years, Reddit is doing Place. So Reddit Place is a huge canvas, 1,000 by 1,000 pixels, and each Reddit user can only place 1 pixel every 5 minutes. And people have to get together and coordinate in order to be able to draw something with these pixels, while also defending their drawings, because other people can just paint over them. And it is really chaotic, but it's also really nice to look at, even as a whole or by zooming in. There are there's a bunch of stuff here, but towards the left side there's a new /Linux corner, which is a pixelated drawing of Tux the penguin with a bunch of Linux distro logos around him, as well as GNOME and KDE. It has the likes of Fedora and Debian represented, but as also a Steam Deck, and one distro that I would have been really happy to see on it was Void Linux, which was not present. But on the second day of this thing, it just got added by the people. So I'm really happy about that. My country, Hungary, also has a couple of drawings. My favorite one is towards the top. There's a Hungarian flag, and there's a picture of Vuk, the little fox, here, which is a classical Hungarian cartoon character. And speaking of Hungary, we have an election going on there, counting the votes right as we speak. The government election, which is really interesting because it looks to be the ratio of people, the number of people who participate looks to be an all-time record, or at least the record in the past 20 or so years. On the tech side of things, I haven't really been doing much. I'm really happy continuing running Fedora. I haven't really booted into Void Linux or anything else as much this past 2 weeks, so I've been mainly using Fedora. So I feel stronger and stronger about just using Fedora for the foreseeable future. It just seems to click with me. And I realized that with a bunch of the GNOME apps being ported to GTK4, since I'm using XFC on my desktop, I was hesitant to decide. I couldn't decide whether I would like to upgrade to Fedora 36 right away, because I use a custom theme, and I was worried that there's a couple of GNOME apps I use, and the GTK4 versions, the liberator versions, wouldn't respect my system theme. But then I learned that the most of the application that I use, which is I think gedit, which is not getting a liberator version anyway because it's deprecated, and also GNOME disks, which hasn't been ported to liberator at all yet on the stable branch of GNOME, so I can just update to Fedora 36 and not have to worry about liberator on my desktop. But the fact, I do have to say that I'm a bit disappointed, but I understand that they couldn't get all of the GNOME apps ported to liberator. But because of this, right now, if you use something with GNOME 42 like Fedora 36, some of the apps have the new Adwaita look, and some of them have the old Adwaita look. But I could solve this by replacing the old Adwaita look, so the legacy theme, as they now call it, by ADW GTK3, which is a GTK3 theme that imitates the Adwaita. So everything looks consistent now. But the reason I'm a bit disappointed is I think the GNOME team could have just updated the legacy Adwaita theme to look more like the new Adwaita theme, to improve consistency. That's just a paper cut of mine, and this is one of the reasons that I'm not really as excited about GNOME 40 and GNOME 42, and I'm more and more looking forward to GNOME 43, where I expect consistency to be a lot better than it is now.
Have you tried the Ubuntu beta yet, Norbert?
No, I've only tried the Fedora beta. I've tried the Ubuntu Nightlies a few months ago. It didn't have the final theme and wallpaper yet, I think, but I really do like the new official Jellyfish wallpaper for Ubuntu. It's not staring into your soul like the Impish Indri did, or even I think the Hippo was also staring at you. And I had a look at some of the screenshots and videos about Ubuntu, and the new Yaru theme looks kind of like libadwaita, but it's not libadwaita yet.
Yeah, and they have that accent colors that you can choose too, so that gives it a little more versatility. Yeah.
Actually, I'm surprised that accent colors haven't been implemented in neither Ubuntu nor GNOME itself years ago, because Windows has had it since I think the beginning of Windows 8 or something.
Well, we've been saying for years that GNOME basically abandoned all their users, so they don't listen to what the users want. It took them this long to figure that out.
Yeah, app indicators, please.
App indicators is my number one gripe with GNOME.
Well, I know now that that's not just a GNOME thing, because Danny from the Elementary OS team fame took to Twitter and was arguing against all the merits of app indicator or any kind of system tray type paradigm at all.
She
You know
drank
what?
the Kool-Aid.
Yeah,
Wait.
I didn't even realize.
They kind of have a point because the other day I was thinking about, okay, what could we use instead of app indicators? And I remember how when Windows 7 came out, Skype had a feature when you wouldn't be able to close the window, it would just minimize itself to the taskbar. So
Fine, do
you
that then.
yeah, so you could in GNOME, I think, you could just use the dash instead of the system tray. And if something is running in the background, it will be present on the dash. And you could just right-click the big icon on the dash and say close the app.
I was
And
thinking the same thing. It could
yeah,
run in the
it could
dash,
work.
and that would work, and then you would get your notifications through the notification system. That
Yeah,
would be
so
something. But what they're doing is nothing, which is not there. I think what they want you to do is open the window and then move it to another desktop. You know, but that's not everybody's workflow. The virtual desktop
yeah.
thing is not how a lot of people do things.
Well, I think what the counter argument to that is if it's not your thing, then don't use it. But a lot of people
Yeah.
don't have a choice but to use GNOME because it is the default in so many distros.
I really do want to like it though, because there are things about GNOME, especially when you're using a laptop with all of its keyboard integrations and all of the
Yeah.
your swipes and things. It's really good for that, and it gives you a little bit more use of the screen real estate that you've got. So there's things to like about GNOME if they just weren't so stinking. And even if you don't want to make it part of the default experience, give us a standard API that we can go by to make a meaningful extendable framework for it.
For app indicators, I think there was news about someone, I think the Fedora team doing just that.
Yeah.
So I think there's an ongoing effort on standardizing how app indicators, how the backend, so the API for app indicators should work.
Okay, well
So
then will
I
that be
think
blessed by the GNOME, team, to make that part of the
I've also seen some concept art, I think official concept art of how GNOME wants to reintroduce app indicators. I couldn't find it the other day, but I think there's some. So I expect something to happen in the next year with
That'll
app
be
indicators.
interesting.
But
Is that
also,
about it for you, Norbert?
yeah, I wanted to say one more thing, but I think I forgot it. So I guess it wasn't important. So we can move forward.
Okay, let's move to Linux innards.
Oh, actually, I remember what I wanted to say. I wanted to say how
Let's not move to Linux innards.
yeah, I wanted to say how my favorite thing about GNOME is Matter, the compositor, because of how good the Wayland implementation is, and all around it as a compositor. Because my list on the because my least favorite thing about XFCE, which I use, is I think their compositor. So my number one wanted feature in XFCE is for them to improve their compositor, but I think this is why sometimes I go and try to run GNOME on my desktop, and I realize I don't really like GNOME for my desktop workflow, but I like it for my laptop, as Bill said, with all the laptop touchpad gestures and stuff.
Yeah.
So, and I think the biggest strength of Budgie is using Matter without the GNOME workflow. I think I've said that a bunch of times, but which is I'm kind of disappointed that Budgie GNOME is Budgie with the GNOME Budgie on top of the GNOME stack is kind of going away. It's still maintained, but I think it's fair to say that most of their focus will be on the EFL rebase of Budgie. I still look forward to it, but I would really like to have a GNOME-based Budgie for the foreseeable future. And now we can transition to the next segment.
Okay, let's move into Linux innards. On today's show, we're going to be looking at tech that has been added to Linux, particularly in the last 5 or 10 years. We kind of think that the top thing that has been such a divisive issue in Linux is systemd, so we'll start there. Leonard Pottering described his systemd as, quote, never finished, never complete, but tracking process of technology, end quote, and further described it as unifying, quote, pointless differences between distributions, end quote, by providing the following three general functions. A service and system manager manages both the system by applying various configurations and its services. A software platform serves as a basis for developing other software. The glue between applications and the kernel provides various interfaces that expose functionalities provided by the kernel.
Obligatory, I would like to interject comment. What you're referring to as Linux is in fact GNU/Linux/systemd.
All right, Richard.
Or Leonard.
This interjection was sponsored by the Free Software Foundation.
Still picking them up as we go.
Yeah.
Or maybe refined.
Oh, here we go again.
Systemd includes features like on-demand starting of daemons, snapshot support, process tracking, and inhibitor locks. It is not just the name of the init daemon, but also refers to the entire software bundle around it, which in addition to the systemd init daemon includes the daemons journald, login, and networkd, and many other low-level components. In January 2013, Pottering described systemd as not one program, but rather a large software suite that includes 69 individual binaries. So
that is, I think, the most important thing about systemd, that a lot of people who complain about systemd not
it's
seem to remember.
monolithic.
It's that if they complain that systemd does too many things, but because it's not one binary, you don't have to have all of those things present on the system in order to have systemd as an init system, if you just want to have it as an init system. But if you already have it as an init system, you might as well make use of all the other features it has.
While systemd did make a shift in how people thought about Linux, breaking the Unix philosophy, it seems most people who truly hate systemd actually just don't like Leonard Pottering. And I think we should be above that level of pettiness.
Yeah, I agree. You hear that, again, going back to the Unix philosophy and people arguing that this is an OS within the OS. It's just too big. It's got its hooks and too many things. And I can see where someone's coming from. There are a number of applications now that absolutely depend on systemd. And if you don't have it installed, yeah, you're kind of out of luck.
Well, are we ricocheting over the huge point, though, that this is not Unix?
This is not Unix, indeed. Is what I wanted to say as well.
Yeah.
And if I want to be really, what's the word? Nitpicky.
Yeah.
I could say that, yes, a bunch of programs depend on systemd, but they also depend on the Linux kernel as well.
And libraries and...
Yeah.
Well, I said if I wanted to be nitpicky because, like, what I just said, it's essentially saying that it is GNU/systemd/Linux. And one of my favorite distros, Void Linux, doesn't use systemd at all. But if a distro uses systemd, I don't really see it as a problem as long as it works. And one thing that I really like about systemd is consistency. The first time I was using a non-systemd distro was MX, and I didn't even know it doesn't boot with systemd. So one day I wanted to do systemctl, and it wasn't there, so I had to look up how to enable services on MX. But I think it uses sysv in it.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So I think consistency is a really good thing if you want to gain more users. And I think there's a crowd. So there's a crowd that says the systemd does too many things. It's an operating system itself. But there's the other crowd who just doesn't like the fact that they get no choice. So I think they would be fine with having systemd as long as they have a choice. For example, the Gen 2 installation guide lets you choose between, I think, syspinit and systemd. And there are distros, what some people like to call like protest distros, like RX and Dev1, which do give you the choice between 2 or 3 or even more init systems. And I don't really feel the need to explore all of those because I'm perfectly fine. I know systemd and I know run it, and both of them were great. So
Well,
if both of them
most
were
systems,
great,
yeah,
sorry. Go.
most systems don't even use all the tools in systemd. For instance, very few distros are using systemd boot.
That's true.
Yeah, and I think that anytime you come up with something new, you're just gonna something new that becomes adopted as mainstream. You're just gonna have this camp of very vocal, very articulate people that are gonna just proclaim from atop their soapbox against this thing, just because it's the thing that's being used. You know.
No, you're right. This isn't actually the first example. You think when Ubuntu started using Upstart, there was quite a bit of hubbub about that as well.
So
I think one of the best features of systemd might be their logging tools, which is, I guess it's more useful on servers than on the desktop, but having the same tools available on the server and the desktop just helps improve consistency.
yeah, I mean, and you might also, there might be some merit in the argument that anytime you come up with something that becomes widespread, if it was developed or started by anybody at either Canonical or Red Hat, it's going to be seen upon as something corporate and capitalist or whatever it is that backs up the argument some of these people have.
There's some truth to that, but even though it might be corporate, it's also free software.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is miles better still than the development that's going on at Microsoft and Google.
And it's arguable that some of the project, because of the complexity of modern code, the things that are going to be more useful and more effective are going to have to be backed up by organizations with considerable resources. You know, like Red
and
Hat, Canonical.
There's not many bigger Linux-focused companies than Red Hat, and I think they are heavily involved in the development of Wayland, as well as Pipewire.
Yeah.
Both, and two things that I really like, and they are the ones developing Fedora, which I also like. So for now, I think I'm really optimistic toward Red Hat, as well as Flatpak. So I think I can say that I like what Red Hat does for Linux.
We can save Flatpak for later. Right now, let's go trash IPsec and OpenVPN and talk about WireGuard.
So yeah, I added this. You know, I was almost from the beginning really excited about WireGuard because it was basically, I mean, there's a few options out there for getting a VPN up and running, and the latest and greatest one is WireGuard. Now, according to the website, and I'm reading this directly from the website, WireGuard is an extremely simple yet fast and modern VPN that utilizes state-of-the-art cryptography. It aims to be faster, simpler, leaner, and more useful than IPsec while avoiding the massive headache. It intends to be considerably more performant than OpenVPN. WireGuard is designed as a general-purpose VPN for running on embedded interfaces and supercomputers alike, fit for many different circumstances. Initially released for the Linux kernel, it is now cross-platform, meaning it's on Windows, macOS, BSD, iOS, and Android, and widely deployable. It is currently under heavy development, but already it might be regarded as the most secure, easy to use, and simplest VPN solution in the industry. Now, you know, there's a lot to that right there. A VPN basically has taken the concept of VPN from this paradigm where you've got a server on one end and then you have clients connected to it. What they've done is they've taken it and made a protocol where every device that's connected is connected on a peer-to-peer basis. So there's nothing really going on until the traffic gets sent. So in my case, I've got a VPN server running on my big server behind me so that I can, while I'm on the road, I can VPN into that box and then have, I've got two benefits really. One is access to my home network, and the other is the Pi-hole, because since that server is using my Pi-hole as the DNS server on with Cloudflare on the back end of that. Once I'm connected to this server through WireGuard, I've actually got all the benefits of Pi-hole as well. So all of my ads are all of my apps on my phone are running without ads, which there's your benefit for doing that. And WireGuard is lightweight and easygoing enough to just basically, you could leave that running all day if you wanted to, and it would have no significant impact on your battery life or the performance of the device.
WireGuard has benefited from positive media coverage. For instance, while Linus Torvalds is not the happiest guy about most additions to Linux, when WireGuard came out, he described the code as elegant.
Yeah.
That gave it a big push.
That is a huge endorsement from a guy who does not mince words.
Yeah, and I think of all the things we'll be discussing here, this is probably the least controversial, at least from what I've seen. I haven't seen a lot of people arguing for the OpenVPN standard rather than WireGuard, you know.
And OpenVPN is fine. It's got its uses. One difference between OpenVPN and WireGuard is that with OpenVPN, you have the choice of encryption methods. And that's a level of complexity most people can do without, honestly. I mean, you want the encryption, but most people are not real aware of what type they should be using and how to set all that up. Well, with WireGuard, the developer is opinionated on that, and he just basically, they has written all that into the code base and has made those decisions for you, and that's fine. You know, you don't really have to really concern yourself with things like that, but it is literally the fastest option out there. And yeah, no, you're right. It's not controversial at all. Of the subjects we're going to talk about, it's probably the least controversial, but it is probably one of the more impactful ones. Now, there's GUIs out there for setting this up, but a person should take the time to sit down and learn how the whole concept works, because it's more akin, in my mind, to the process of setting up SSH keys and then copying those keys onto the server that you're going to connect with, and having that sort of communication back and forth. It's a little more similar to that than it is with VPNs that we're used to with IPsec. I've never actually used IPsec. I have used OpenVPN, and it was always just a huge pain to keep an OpenVPN server up and running here at home that I could connect to. It seemed like it was so sensitive to little changes in the kernel or whatever, and it would just stop working for me. And then WireGuard comes out. I've created a WireGuard instance on this server behind me, and it's been running for a year and a half without having to do a single thing to it. It's brilliant. And
I mean, having it baked directly into the kernel probably helps with that, you know.
As of kernel 5.6, yep.
And what a lot of people need to understand is having that in the kernel means that it doesn't have to go through a lot of, well, I mean, it's all very technical, but things that are in the kernel are going to be orders of magnitude faster than they are if they're working from user space. And when you've got a communication protocol and a networking protocol, you want those at low level as possible so that you can have the most reliable and the fastest connection that you can get. And WireGuard seems to fit that bill. But I use it while I'm on the road. I can connect my phone to it with the official Android app. And then, like I said, once that app is connected, it's basically running up there in the system tray. And then I've got the benefit of Pi-hole anywhere I'm at in the country. I can sit and read from my news apps without all the annoying ads and things like that. And you really don't. If you've got a good signal on your phone, there's really no. You get no sensation of speed loss at all with it. That's the other nice thing. Is I mean, the only thing it's doing is doing a little bit of WireGuard. It adds a little encryption to the stream, and then from then on out, it's just basically how fast is the machines you've got on both ends.
Well, we're all in love with WireGuard, so why don't we move on to something a bit more controversial, like universal package managers?
Yeah, so here's going to be
here's the war.
So here's our favorite topic, and I do have to say nobody here is probably an expert on universal package formats, but it seems to be that these, in my mind at least, these formats came to address a couple of serious problems. One being that as software is developed and it evolves, it can sometimes diverge in terms of the toolkits that it needs in order to run. So sometimes it needs its own runtime. So that's one problem that they wanted to solve with these. The other problem was that if Linux is going to be marketable as an option for third-party software, whether it be open source or not, they want a standard format for developers to use so that they can just write their software for one thing and then have it distributable to Linux as a whole.
I think that's fair because if you look at Android, on Android you just use APK files.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter where you get them from. If they're an APK file and therefore the right version of Android that you have, you can just install them.
Right. But I think that was the problem they were trying to solve, but such as Linux is, whenever somebody comes up with something that is effective, but it goes one direction that somebody doesn't like, somebody's going to come up with a tool that does the same thing that goes in a complete opposite direction because of the tribal nature of people that use Linux, such is the case with universal package formats. Your two biggest ones being Snap and Flatpak. They are fundamentally the same, while philosophically somewhat different, I think.
At least we don't have a dozen of these popular ones.
But I worry
we
though,
have had AppImage since 2004. What do we need Flatpak and Snap for?
The problem was that they just never believed that AppImage had the mind share it needed, or it didn't integrate into the desktop as well as it should have, or any number of problems that if you're searching for one you're going to find. Like I was going to say though, that I think these formats come along to solve a problem that we had this fragmentation in the ecosystem. But I think what's happened is we've just added more fragmentation, or what I think it might be perceived as being more fragmentation in the ecosystem, because we already really just had two things to begin with. We had debs and RPMs. Make us a deb, make us an RPM. And then you've pretty much distributed to everybody that matters, because everybody else is taking from that and making their own thing.
But they have a bunch of distros that don't use either deb or RPM.
Well, that's true, but we can take, like Arch, for example, can take a deb, extract what it needs from it, and then make their tar.exe, and you know, it is what it is. But if you're going to try to hit the huge number of corporate or the huge number of users, period, in the Linux ecosystem, you would want to hit one of those two. And because we're a Coke and Pepsi world, right? You know,
but like I said, we already had AppImage. Why couldn't one of the corporations, Red Hat or Canonical, get behind that and fix the difficulties and curate that instead of having to come up with each new different?
Like with most things, you know, you've got a development strategy for for these open source projects, and AppImage being no different, where you've got a development team and they've got a philosophical basis for what they're doing, and they're not going to take the lead from companies like Canonical or Red Hat and to tell them how to run their project. And being that this project has no corporate backing, third-party software vendors are not going to take it seriously.
Not invented here syndrome.
Exactly. I mean, it doesn't matter if AppImage is technically better than Flatpak.
I had instances with AppImage where it wouldn't start, and I looked at the output and it was missing some libraries, so I still had to manually install some library in order to run. I think it happened multiple times
But
with
again,
multiple AppImages.
But again, if a big company was curating it, they could have fixed those problems.
So you're the head developer of AppImage. You've been making this thing to solve this problem with fragmentation. You wanted to offer a way for developers to create software that'll work anywhere, period. Because, from a technical standpoint, you don't even need a framework installed. You don't even need FlatHub installed. You don't need Snapd. You can just literally download an AppImage and run it as is. It's brilliant. But
I would...
let's assume for a second that it works the way it should.
But even if it does, there's still the fact that AppImage, there is the AppImage hub, but it may become better and better curated in the future. But there's still the fact that using a package manager is just more convenient for downloading packages and for updates. There's two projects. One is AppImage Launcher, and the other is AppImage. I think AppImage.
I've tried the launcher, AppImage Launcher, and it
AppImage Launcher creates desktop files automatically for your AppImages. And there's another one that I don't remember the name, but it lets you browse the AppImage hub and download. And there's even tools for updating AppImages. So I think AppImages could get to a point where you can just seamlessly install them via, like if you were using a package manager. There needs to be a package manager for AppImages. But that doesn't have to change the fact that they are just a single file and it's very convenient.
But let's assume all that. Let's assume all that happens. But just a second, Moss. You get all that to work right. It's still an open source project ran by an open source developer, okay? And what third-party proprietary, especially, software vendors are looking for is something that's got corporate backing. Okay, so what your question? Why not just have these corporations back up AppImage? The unfortunate thing about our ecosystem is that people, that same tribalism that we users have in our distributions and the software that we like to use exists in the developer space as well, where no open source developer wants to take the lead from a company like Red Hat or Canonical, which would be the absolutely necessary step if you was to make something like that an option for third-party vendors. Like, I don't know, let's shoot for the moon. Adobe or something like that, because that's let's face it, we thought we built these things with the let's build it and they'll come kind of attitude. We thought, okay, if we build these universal package formats, then companies like Adobe will want to bring their software to Linux. Companies like Microsoft will want to release Office 365 on Linux. Whether or not that happens ever, it's going to depend on how unified these things are. And unfortunately, the way Linux is and the people that use it, the more options you come up with, the more ways people come up with doing it another way. I think the problem with AppImage is that it doesn't have the mind share or the corporate backing, and they have a leadership structure that just wouldn't allow for that. Now, I could be wrong, and
I think it comes. Is there really a war between these package managers? Is there a winner already? Does there need to be a winner? I mean,
I don't think so.
Does one have to come to the top in order,
I don't
for
think
everyone
so.
to adopt it?
My
but
argument
everyone
is,
in the community says Flatpak has already won the day,
Some people like to say that because of how many distros just started adapting Flatpak.
But see,
I've been trying to say this for a while, there is an open source program that nobody has adopted yet, and you have to compile it from binaries, and I'm trying to find the name of it right now, that will draw from the App Image Store, the Flatpak Store, and the FlatHub, and the Snap Store, and bring it to you all in one package.
Yeah,
I just seen a video about it. I
anybody being able to sell that to a third-party vendor that wants to sell expensive corporate software and know that it will be maintained and distributed in a secure way, or what they believe to be a secure way. They want to know how that tool chain works from start to finish. And what we have here just looks like, in the beginning, it looked like fragmentation, and what it looks like now is even more fragmentation. I mean, that's just the way it appears to me. Because the obvious is true. We've had these universal formats for years now. They've all proven to have their merits. They're all good at what they do. Leaving all the tribalism aside, they all seem to work in the way that they work, in the way that they're used. And the difference it has made in the software that is available to us, in my opinion, is minimal. Honestly. It solved one problem, I think, with being able to get a piece of software on Linux that was already available to us, but yet it might have just worked better on one distribution than it did another. Now we have a way of installing that and getting the runtime from the distribution that it worked well on. So if something works well on Fedora, I can install that Flatpak, or I can install that Snap on Ubuntu, and I can still get that Fedora runtime to make that application run well. None of these things matter to companies like Adobe and Microsoft when it comes time for them to distribute their commercial software.
I think a lot of packages are still not officially maintained by the developers on a FlatHub.
And that's another problem, isn't it?
Yeah, because I know that Microsoft Teams is on FlatHub, but I'm pretty sure it's just a repackaging of the deb or the RPM. But I know that in the meanwhile, I found App Outlet, which is an app store for Snaps, Flatpaks, and app images. So is that what you were referring to, Moss?
No, but I am looking while I'm listening to all this, and there are actually 10 such that has been noted on one site, and nobody accepts any of them.
See, and that's but
wild.
You see, though, the more you
got more fragmentation.
Exactly, that's what I'm getting at. The more excellent, it doesn't matter that you've got 10 excellent solutions. It just matters that there are 10 excellent solutions. Why are there 10? Why is there not just one? Well, that's open source. Anybody that's got the skill set can come in here and make something that works, or they could take something that already works and add features to it and fork it if they wanted to. That's the nature of open source. And you're not going to be able to get around that.
I'm looking at the documentation on one called On Command Unified Manager, and these people don't even know how to use a font to lay out on their documentation.
Well, that's not a good sign, is it?
It's really hard to read, but...
Yeah, and, if you go back to, you think about that, if you have one source to grab from, I mean, that's essentially what Canonical's done, and look at the backlash they get for that, for having that back-end proprietary single source.
Canonical can operate a little differently because they have a customer base. They have a group of people that they are trying to serve, and they're trying to offer them the best product that they can offer for the customers that come to Canonical that need the solutions that they can offer. And Snaps is designed to give their customer base the access to the most software that Canonical can come up with. Because Canonical had its own unique, I wouldn't say unique, but its own problem that it sort of exists within all of this is that they have customers that are running many different versions of Ubuntu. And so what is the best way to handle distribution of software that absolutely needs to work? Do we package it up for each individual distribution? Okay, well now we've got to come up with a lot of different repositories. We've got to I don't know how many supported versions of Ubuntu are out there right now, but you would need a tool
Around
chain.
5, I think.
Oh, for crying out, yeah. So you're going to need a tool chain maintained for all of these distributions, or you can come up with a package solution where each individual app has just the things it needs within that container, and then it runs as its own file system, sort of, within the system that's running it, and within the host. It's got its own package, it's got its own runtime, and it runs that way. Is that an easier way to handle it? Well, almost certainly yes. We can laser focus on the application and give it just the exact runtime it needs to work as well as it can work, and then leave it at that.
Let's take a vote.
And especially with LTS distro like Ubuntu LTS or even Debian that have a slower release schedule, you get to have the latest versions of software. And also, some people say that either Snap or Flatpak has to win. I don't think so, because, like I said, we don't have a dozen popular universal package managers. We have Snap and Flatpak. We also have Epimage, but it's not as big as the other two. I don't think either of those two has to go away. I think they can coexist, much like how Deb and RPM has coexisted for a long time. I think they don't necessarily prevent each other from developing and growing.
Okay.
But then again, I agree with that, but then again, I never had a problem with there being Deb and RPM. I think that... But then I'm thinking like a Linux user. My whole point...
And there are a couple managers that will convert RPM to Deb or Deb to RPM.
Yeah, and even to other formats.
Right. My point is how it's perceived by a third-party software vendor that we're trying to sell all this to. So Canonical goes to Adobe and says, hey, we need you to... We're wondering if we could get you to distribute Adobe Creative Suite as a Snap. Well, why should we use Snap and not Flatpak? Well, because, that's going to be their question. Why? We told you that we didn't want to distribute it because we didn't have the right amount of users to justify the resources we would need to maintain this thing. Why all of a sudden would Snaps be the best option?
Well, if I was Canonical, maybe I could argue that Snaps are better for Adobe if I wanted to convince them, because it is made by Canonical, and while Red Hat has a lot of customers on the server side, Ubuntu has a lot more customers on the desktop than, say, Fedora or CentOS. I'm not even sure if CentOS and other RHEL derivatives are more used than Ubuntu, but in a production environment, like media production, I think it's safe to say that Ubuntu might be the most used.
It probably is, but these are conversations that only Linux people take part in, How do you sell that to?
Well, Mozilla chose Snap, so there you go.
Oh, well, then.
That's it.
Yeah, conversation
That's
over
it. Yep.
Okay, we've got a lot more things to argue about. Let's just
Mozilla chose Snaps
get a
because
quick
they
vote
wanted...
here. Who is using Snaps for the most part?
For the most part? What do you mean by the most part?
Well, some people use some Flatpak, some Epimage, some Snap. Which do you prefer?
Well,
Bill?
See that there again. I mean, it's just not that simple, because I would like there to be...
That's in all of the above. Josh?
Well, as Flatpak is what's bundled with Linux Mint, that's just what I tend to gravitate to. They theme well, they work well, so that's it.
Okay, Norbert?
Flatpak. I really like how flexible it is, and it lets me use. I haven't really used Snap, to be honest.
And Norbert is also a Fedora person.
Hold on a second, Moss. I don't think it's that simple, and I don't think it's fair to pick one over the other. I think if I was using an Ubuntu-based distribution, I think you're probably going to have a greater success rate with snaps.
But Mint is an Ubuntu-based distro.
Well,
yes,
sure,
but they don't have Snap out of the box.
You've got hurdles you have to jump through built in order just to get Snapd installed, which I've already done. I'm not using any snaps, but I've already, just for proof of concept, I've got it working. But the other problem is just some applications are not available on both Snap and Flatpak. You know, I would really like there to be a Nextcloud Flatpak, but unfortunately there's just not.
Okay. Well, I too am a Flatpak user. I wasn't saying that this is the way everyone should go. I wasn't trying to have a vote saying everyone does what we need to do.
No, we understand.
I'm saying that we have a lot of arguing yet to do. Let's get down to Wayland.
Who's got Wayland?
I've got Wayland.
Okay.
I've had Wayland even before I knew what it was, because when I started out with Manjaro, I think it was defaulting to Wayland. It worked until I tried to share my screen on Discord. So, and that's a problem because it wasn't implemented. It wasn't implemented because while Xorg it's a tried and true piece of tech, and it's an implementation of X11. Wayland is not an implementation of anything. Wayland is a protocol like X11, and there are multiple implementations. So GNOME has its own implementation for working with Wayland. I think it's called libmatter. There's another implementation called WI roots, is what Sway uses, for example. So if you are developing something and you want it to run on Wayland, you don't just have to make it work with one implementation, you have to get it to work with multiple implementations. And I think that's one of the things that is holding back Wayland development. Well, I mean, if you look at the state of how Wayland adaptation is now, it's safe to say that GNOME's Wayland implementation is the most mature. It's the smoothest working so far. KDE is getting there, but I'm not sure if there are any other major desktop environments that have a working Wayland session yet.
Well, we've had Wayland around since 2008. It was started by a Red Hat developer named Christian Hegsberg. And it gets used or not used. And one of the biggest problems is NVIDIA keeps trying to rewrite the specs for it so that NVIDIA Wayland doesn't work the same as other Waylands, and we all have to manage to get it to work in our distro.
Yeah, and I know that people have brought up the fact that, you know, X is really old. There's a lot of code in there. It's basically held together with duct tape and bubblegum at this point. And
they are closing the project within 2 years.
Yeah, so I know this is going to be a big topic in the coming years. But for right now, this is totally plumbing to me. Like, whatever works, and I could care less.
Wayland is also way more focused on security.
Well, besides Wayland as a display server, we also have Wayland as a compositor, and Ubuntu keeps trying to use something else as a compositor, which they've already abandoned in their own Unity framework.
Oh, Mir.
Lumiere.
Good old Mir.
Lumiere.
Yep.
The mainline project's not using that.
Well, this is also kind of a side issue in Bodhi, because Bodhi is based on E17, but they wrote the compositor out of it to get Moksha. So, are you using the compositor? Are you using the display driver? What?
Wayland is interesting because for Wayland, the window so for example, if I'm running Sway is both the window manager and the compositor. And Wayland is a display server protocol. So you have one thing. legit way. If you're running GNOME on Wayland, I think Matter is both the window manager and the compositor. And I know that on my non-NVIDIA machine, Wayland compositors just seem to work way smoother, way nicer than, well, for example, when I tried to get i3 to work with PyCom as a compositor, I had really bad graphic artifacts. But on my NVIDIA desktop, I'm not planning on moving to NVIDIA because NVIDIA Wayland is just not there yet. But it's still better than a year ago, thankfully.
It also matters what desktop you're using. Apparently, KDE has much better implementation of Wayland than the other desktops at this time.
No, everywhere I see people saying that GNOME has the best, and Plasma Wayland still has a few things they have to work out. At least that's what I hear everywhere.
Well, Mutter's always been really good, and I remember when I came back to Linux Mint from using Ubuntu Mate for a time, one of the first things I noticed was, hey, I don't have screen tearing anywhere, where it used to be on Mate, I'd have to switch between Compiz and Compton and, to get all the applications to work. So it's kind of nice.
Yeah, I'm reading right now that Enlightenment has claimed Wayland support since E20, but they're still working on getting a full compositor for Wayland. Okay, well, apparently we don't want to argue about Wayland. Let's try Pulse Audio and Pipewire.
I tried them, and I haven't really noticed a lot of difference. For example, I've used both on Arch, and I didn't really notice anything being different. I know that I had some more issues with Pipewire on Void than with Pulse Audio, but that's because I think that's because Void pre-configures less stuff for you than like Fedora or Debian. But I've also heard from Microtunnel that it also depends on how well Pipewire is implemented. He listed OpenSUSE, Tumbleweed, Arch, and Fedora as the best Pipewire implementations, and I haven't really done serious audio and video production on Linux other than recording with Audacity, and Audacity just seems to be doing its own thing, and you can't really manage Audacity with PV control on either Pulse Audio and Pipewire. So I'm a bit indifferent. I just take people's word for it. People who are more knowledgeable in the audio server sphere, that Pipewire is supposed to be a lot better, and it's supposed to be able to do a lot more than Pulse Audio.
That's the thing. For the average end user, I've looked at this and I'm thinking, okay, so Pipewire, like what do you get from it as just an average user? Because I don't need anything really advanced. I know they say it hooks into Jack easier and all this stuff that's really complicated. So I think if you're doing that, fine, that's probably an advantage. But other than that, I mean, if you're just sitting down at your computer and you're going to listen to some music,
over the years, more users have complained about the way Pulse Audio is working or isn't working, and they've had a lot of fixes to make. And apparently Pipewire was written to compress the code a bit, get it down to something easier to work with, and replace all these issues that were coming up. But of course it developed its own issues. That's the way software works.
Yeah, like Josh said, the average person, if they just want to listen to music, what if they can't listen to music because there's no sound coming out? Because something in the depths of the Linux audio stack, something just got tangled up. And the audio stack is really, I think, one of the lesser polished parts of the Linux desktop. Because if you look under the hood and you try to get stuff figured out, it literally just piping things into other things. And it seems to be a lot more simple with Pipewire.
That would make sense. But just for the record, I haven't had any audio issues ever on Linux, like never once. It's one of the areas that's always been rock solid for me.
The only problem I have is when, and I've had trouble because I've got my other two co-hosts on Three Fat Truckers. It's if they unplug something, or they plug something in, they like Dave, for example, he bought a new webcam and he plugged it in, and it Pulse Audio, for whatever reason, switched over to using that as the default. It just, for whatever reason, turned, I literally had his studio microphone set up as default. So I didn't think, if I did that and I disabled everything else, I didn't think if you declared a default device that you would have to worry about plugging anything else in, and then Pulse Audio saying, "Oh, well, I see you've got this new thing. You must want that as the default now." And then, of course, that's exactly what it did. So I'm wondering if Pipewire solves that problem, because that's the only problem I've had. And earlier today, I just to try to replicate, I hooked my old webcam back up, just to see if I could get that thing to do the exact same thing. And what I noticed was, if it wasn't disabled in Pulse Audio prior to unplugging it, if I plugged it back in, it would switch the default over to this other device.
To be fair, I think this problem is present in Windows as well, to some degree. But I had the problem present on Fedora as well, but I have an HDMI display, so it sees it as an audio output as well. But I just plug my headphones into the 3.5mm jack on the computer. But when I unplug it, it doesn't see it anymore. But what it does see, what Pipewire / Pulse Audio sees, is the other output, the HDMI. So it just switches back to that. But when I plug my headphones back in, it stays on the HDMI. So I have to go to the volume, the audio applet on the panel, and I have to switch to my headphones back. So I went into PiView Control, which is, fortunately, it's the same front end for managing both Pipewire and Pulse Audio servers, and I just turned off my HDMI output, the device completely. So it doesn't even try to switch to that, I think. So that seemed to solve it. But I had the same thing on Windows, I think, but I had to manually switch back to my front headphone output because it kept falling back to the HDMI.
Okay, I lied. This is a problem I've had. So when I plug in my microphone to do recording, Mint will actually switch that to be my output device. It doesn't actually affect the output. I mean, I can still hear everything as if it hasn't changed, but in the menu selection, it does list it as being the output device. So I guess there is a small problem there.
And there have been times when my microphone on Audacity is the right microphone, but my microphone on Discord is not, or vice versa.
Oh, and that's even more complex, because Audacity is trying to talk directly to ALSA to make these. So Audacity is going to do the exact same thing Pulse Audio is going to do. It's going to decide on its own what device you want to use to record with.
And I assume this is why I couldn't solve my Audacity problems with replacing Pulse Audio with Pipewire.
Right.
It just defaults to the webcam. That's what it always does.
So is Pipewire just not ready yet, or what?
If it was, I don't know. I don't use it a lot. I tried it on Fedora and it worked fine, but to be fair, I don't use Fedora to make podcasts or anything.
I think it's still firmly in the under construction phase. They're still working on it. And it's pretty young, I think, in comparison to a lot of things we're talking about today.
But I think it's true, though. Most of the people that are going to feel the most benefit or sacrifice in this is going to be the people in the pro audio level of the production,
Well, then let's move on to disputed file systems. What's on the list here is ZFS and ButterFS.
And I use both.
I also wanted to include XFS, but I think it was introduced in the 90s, so it wouldn't really fit. But which one is it? XFS that has a built-in module for Ubuntu, so it's built in the kernel, but not other distros.
ZFS.
So ZFS, because I think the only time then it's probably XFS that I've I encountered XFS when I was trying out Nitrox Linux, and it had XFS as a default file system. So what is XFS?
Well,
exactly?
XFS is it's GPL compliant, so you can put it in the kernel, no problem, fine, and it works good. It's not real good it's not a good choice for your root file system because it doesn't handle like millions of tiny little files all that well. It's good for servers with large files, like a media server or something like that. It handles that pretty good. But
what are its benefits compared to, for example, ext4?
I think it does some. It's got snapshotting built in. XFS does, but it doesn't have transparent compression, so it's not comparable to ButterFS. On that level, it doesn't solve some of the modern needs that we have with in terms of needing to compress for file space, and then the snapshotting. I don't know anybody that actually uses the snapshotting feature on XFS, but I know it's there, and I don't know how to use it, but I know it's there. All the attention seems to go on to ButterFS, and then of course ZFS.
Yeah, but nobody seems to use it. I mean, everyone gives it the attention. Everyone talks about, wow, this is really great. Wow, we really need using it. Even the guy that created RiserFS said that ButterFS was the direction to go in Linux file systems, but it only gets used in SUSE for the most part.
Well, and Fedora has it as a default.
Yeah, Fedora and SUSE have it as a default.
And Garuda does as well.
That's a new thing for Fedora.
You are going to have problems with a file system. Well, for starters, let's call it what it is. Some developers at Canonical are not ButterFS developers, so you're going to get people that are going to go with the software stacks that they're familiar with. That's one thing. The other is there is a huge difference between ButterFS and Extended 4, and Canonical has a commercial consumer base that they need to serve, and they're being that they don't have any ButterFS developers, they don't want to put their money where their mouth is when it comes to a new file system.
It's kind of interesting that they did that ZFS on root with the licensing issues with that too.
What that was is ZFS does have corporate backing with Oracle, so it's a little bit easier to say ZFS is older, frankly. You can put your money on ZFS being more reliable.
Canonical, and more proprietary.
Well, it's not proprietary, but it's not compatible with the Linux kernel. It's got a type of open source license,
MIT,
an MIT license that is not compatible with the Linux kernel itself. It's still open source, but it's not GPL compatible. So it can't be mainline in the kernel. Canonical says, okay, well, what's to stop us from putting it in our distribution tree? Well, let's put it in there and see what happens. Nothing happened, so they just keep doing it. There's no. It's one of those things where they went ahead and said, well, we're not real sure what came first, the chicken or the egg, so let's go ahead and just put the chicken out there and see if the egg comes afterwards. And they're not pushing it as the default file system. When I installed 1910 on this server behind me, it wasn't even offered as a server option, which if it was going to be an option from Canonical that they were actually going to push, then it would have been available on the server image, and it's not. It just isn't. So, well, of course, I can't speak for 2204, but on, did I say 1910? 2110, it was not on there. So they're not like pushing it as the mainline, the default option, but it is there available. They want people to try it, and get input from them as to how good it works. I'm not going to do it. I'm never going to do it until it's until it is GPL compatible, and I don't see that ever happening. That being said, I've got ZFS running on the data drives that are in that server because it is a better option for all the stuff that you want to save because it keeps things, it self heals. I can run a scrub on that, or even if I don't, let's say I've got a movie on ZFS and the wife is playing the movie upstairs. I know she is because I hear this thing chugging behind me. As that file is being played, ZFS is comparing that file, the data in that file, to the checksum and the bits that are on the other two drives that are part of its Z pool, if you will. Comparing those checksums, and if there's a problem, it is healing it as it plays. And
that sounds like that might be hard on the drives, though.
Well, I mean, you're gonna want good NAS quality drives when you're building a server like this, which is, I got Iron Wolf drives in this thing. I probably got about $3,000 wrapped up in that thing.
Holy smokes!
Those drives were about $500 a piece. There's 3 of them in there, and then the operating system is on a 980 Pro Samsung NVMe. Now that's on ButterFS. Now I've ran ButterFS as a server file system, and I've had problems with that weren't as easy to fix with ButterFS as they were with ZFS, just because ZFS is just doing it by itself. ZFS has a file system. It's not just the file system. ZFS also has the tools built in to maintain the file system, and it's brilliant for that. But none of these things are easy. None of these things just work without somebody doing a little learning as to how to set them up and how to maintain them. ButterFS will do some of the same things that ZFS will do, but it requires a couple of more steps, a couple of more commands to make it happen. I think both of these file systems are brilliant for what they do, but they're not going to be the easiest option for somebody to get up and running and maintain just for a regular Linux distro on a laptop or something.
Which leads me to a question. I always use the XT4 just because it's well established. It does everything I need it to do. I don't really have any use, But has there been any work started on a continuation like the XT5? Does anyone know if there's going to be a next iteration of this, or are people planning on just shifting?
There's actually a lot of development on it on ext4. That is still the preferred file system for most Linux distributions, just because, see, the thing about file systems like ButterFS is that all of the advantages you get with the compression and the snapshotting and things like that, this requires more CPU cycles devoted towards it, and which makes it not necessarily the best option to put on a distribution, because you want this distribution to work as good as it can, and you don't want to give up CPU cycles just to the file system, which, depending on how much compression you're actually using, the more compression, the more CPU cycles you're going to need to compress and decompress every time you're accessing a file. And it's a matter of examining what the priorities are. What's the priority? The access time to the file, the speed of my machine, or is space on my hard drive the issue? Well, nowadays hard drives are up in the terabyte range, and a distribution installs to what? Maybe what's the average size nowadays? 15 gigs, something like that, or less?
Oh yeah, less probably.
So it's nowadays it's more, well, we need this distribution to work on a wider range of machines, and the advantages of ButterFS and ZFS are fine, but I don't think they're going to serve the greater good for the most number of people. And so I think that's why we still, and probably for the foreseeable future, most of your mainstream distributions are going to keep using EXT4. And I actually agree with that.
I did look it up here. There is nothing going on to make it EXT5. EXT4 is continuing to be developed, and it's also being adopted more widely. Mac OS has full EXT2, 3, and 4 read-write capability.
Oh, wow.
Paragon offers a commercial product Linux file system for Windows, and WSL includes EXT4 read-write.
Well, I'll tell you, this is one of the first things I noticed when I came over to being a Linux user was just how much stable EXT4 was than NTFS.
Yeah,
just incredibly stable.
Yeah, stability is the best thing about EXT4.
It makes you wonder why Microsoft just keeps going with this. I'm not going to say broken, but it's just not very good file system on their back end.
It's bad.
I think
it's bad. Don't sugarcoat it, Bill. Let them have it.
Well, I think the only thing that makes sense to me is just that they must have come up with the idea that most of their users are upgrading from 7 to 8 to 10 to 11. By the way, the reason there's no Windows 9 is because 7, 8, 9.
Oh, ba-doom-dum.
No,
Pause for comedic break.
Okay, comedic break. Well, for those people that were confused by that, the reason there's no 9 is because they couldn't get their bloody servers to tell the difference between Windows 9 and Windows 95 or 98.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the technical, nerdy reason that...
Yeah, because some legacy system was looking at the first digit of the Windows number version to see what version it was, if it was 90-something or if it was other versions. I think so. 9 would have been... I've even heard theories that they didn't want to go with 9 because 9 is considered unlucky in places like Japan, and they thought it might have been hard to sell the products with the number 9 in the name to places that are...
Yeah, sure, okay.
Well, speaking of Windows, I think we've burned out the file systems here.
Oh, we did?
Why don't we look at wine-based tech, which is something I know nothing about since I run no Windows programs, including games, on my systems, but I'm sure some of you guys do.
Yeah, outside of Proton, I don't really have any for it either, so...
Me neither, but I added in hopes that someone would have something to say.
So Wine is very hit and miss. For those of you that are not familiar, Wine is another one of those recursive acronyms that just stands for Wine is not
an emulator.
There you go. And it gives you a compatibility layer that allows you to run some with, if you could see my fingers now, some Windows software, and it's very hit and miss, and I invite anybody that is thinking about trying to get a piece of Windows software to work to consult the WineHQ database.
And
generally,
the professional crossover software, which feeds all its developments back to Wine, is the latest version of what Wine might be, and you have to pay for that.
Yeah. The good news is that there's far more integration going on nowadays in terms of development. You know, you've got a lot of people that are working for all of these projects at the same time, and they're collaborating, and I would say it's not great, the status of this thing. I don't think it ever will be. I'm not sure it should be. I'm not sure how much Windows software I would recommend anybody ran on their Linux system.
Well, Valve seems to think it's good enough for them to seemingly bet the future of their company on something based on Wine.
So games is a different animal altogether, isn't it? Because it's one of those things where people want to just be able to play their game, and they don't give a hoot as to what this thing is they're playing it on, you know. And a game is a work of art, I think. So it kind of exists in its own world, and Valve recognized early on that it would be a lot easier for them and cheaper to develop a machine that could work with Windows, from my point of view, but comes with a working version of Linux that is fine by itself. If you're technical enough, you can get Windows working on it. And if that's true, then you've got access to the Xbox library of games, which is just as considerable as Steam. But that's a different subject in my mind altogether. As it's different than just like getting Office to run on your computer or something like that, or getting programs to run that companies are obstinate about offering a Linux port of. Oh, okay, fine, I'll just run it on Windows. It just seems like those are the first applications that don't work, is the ones that the company doesn't want to offer you a Linux version. Well, they're not going to let it work on Wine either, and I'm not technical enough as far as that goes to say why some stuff works and some won't.
Either way, a shout to Codeweavers, because I know Valve gets mentioned a lot, but Codeweavers did so much work on that back end to get this going, and whether the software winds up working ultimately or not, I mean, they've done a lot for this community.
Yeah, they have.
And I think they kind of fly under the radar.
For those of you who don't know, Codeweavers is the company that produces Crossover.
And a lot of that, like I said before, a lot of these developers are working for both projects. So you do have a lot of crossover work going on. I tried to get Crossover installed at one point, and I never could get it working. But that was a very long time ago. My attitude towards software these days is if I can't find a Linux port of it, then I just try to find a different piece of software to use.
Right, and in this scenario, I mean, it really kind of segues back to what we were speaking about earlier with the universal package managers. That's really where the focus is now. I don't see too many people saying in forums, "Oh, try to run this via Wine."
Yeah,
I know there's certain programs that aren't, in there with the package managers yet, but it's much more rare today than it used to be, I think.
It is. I mean, you still got the good old holdouts of Adobe and Microsoft Office, but it's become less relevant, I think, also as a lot of these software vendors have moved to a more online cloud-based offering.
Well, you got that right. That seems to be the way of the future.
I mean, that might be more sustainable because you're really just building against one API. You're offering one product, and it doesn't matter what you're running it on, because all you really need is a browser, and just about all the browsers. Well, is there any browsers we can't get on any? Leaving aside Safari, of course, nobody cares about that. Is there any browsers you can't get on all the platforms? So
Internet Explorer, which is I think it's getting finally retired.
What's that?
Hopefully.
I think Internet Explorer will finally be properly retired soon.
Bring it back.
Either way, it's many years too late.
Bring it back. Give us something to talk about.
Oh, no, please don't. Please don't.
Works best on Internet Explorer 12.
Oh no. The pain is palpable.
Well, I think there really isn't any other browsers other than Safari that you can't get on other platforms, because basically everything is either Chromium or Firefox based, and both of those are open source.
Yeah, and
I just look at big projects like, even though it looks like it's going away, but things like Stadia, where they're even taking gaming, or NVIDIA, I think, had their own service where you're putting all that in the cloud, rendering it, pushing it back down to kind of almost like a dumb terminal device. It just seems like, and I know there's latency issues and its own problems with that, but I really think that cloud is going to be a big, I mean, obviously it is, but it's going to be a massive.
Whether we agree with that or not, it makes sense that becomes the thing, because it means everything out there is a thin client, and it doesn't need to necessarily be a powerful device. It's just connecting to some cloud API somewhere, and
just
studio.
Remember, there is no cloud.
It's just another
someone else's computer.
And
right.
That's absolutely true. I understood that from the get-go, but I also understood that what you're doing is you're farming out all of the heavy resource intensive processes to a more powerful system. And
Right.
that is absolutely the case with Stadia. When Stadia came out, I was one of the few people that thought it was brilliant, but what I was not taking into account was the shockingly terrible state of internet service in the United States. We have there are people in Bangladesh with better access to the internet than we have in the United States. I mean, if you're living in a big
Moldova
city,
has better internet than I have here in Knoxville.
and
we have better
Cheaper. It's
internet than
$20 a
US.
month.
The
and
truth
you think
is,
about these. Oh, go ahead.
well, I was just going to say, the truth is, the reason for that is just because in smaller developing countries, they built the infrastructure up out of nothing. So they're building this thing that is meaningful with all of the modern parts right from the get-go. And here we've got already the infrastructure in place. It's been like added to over the epochs, but it is all owned by the telecoms.
Yep.
And so if you're anything you're going to do, you've got to make it profitable to them because they already own the infrastructure. So yeah, welcome to America, folks.
Yeah, and outside of America, this whole cloud thing really makes sense. Where you have people who their only computing device might be their phone, and it might be like a low-end Android phone. So moving the heavy lifting off of the device and into the internet is probably a real boon for them.
And it makes sense.
There's a difference between talking about wine and whining about tech. Anyhow,
well,
why don't we move on? We actually have some vibrations this episode. So why don't we move on to that? Are we done talking this?
Yeah, I think so. I think wine is what it is. I am interested in seeing how it progresses. I'm all for the concept of it. What I just caution people to do is not rely on software that will work on wine, because all it takes is for these developers to change one little thing that's not compatible, and then you might be completely out of luck at some point.
Stick to the FOSS, stick to the native.
All right. Well, let's move on to vibrations from the ether.
Ooh.
And we do have some feedback this month. I keep saying month.
We've got one listener.
Hoppers. Well, we are working at getting our episodes out. We've got out in a week, I think. Okay, from Brad Alexander, he says, I just listened to mintCast 379.0, welcome back, Moss, and had a couple of comments. I've never been a fan of GNOME. It has never worked correctly for me, even going back to Red Hat 5.2. However, in more recent times, when the GNOME devs said in effect that they would not give users the knobs to tweak GNOME, and they should just take what the devs give them and be happy about it, at that point I refused to load it, as the devs sounded like they were working with Balmer. I used Enlightenment from 1996 to 2003 and then switched to KDE so I could support my family after they converted to Linux. So what I have found is that in my experience, the same people that complain about GNOME's lack of also seem to complain that KDE has too many knobs, even though, at least in my experience, KDE's defaults are sane. The other comment is that you were expressing hope that, in the aftermath of the Log4j debacle, the megacorps and tech oligarchs would follow through on their promise to support the free software and software developers. As a crotchety old sysadmin, I am here to point out that getting your hopes up will only lead to tears. It is lip service, nothing more. Maybe they will do it in the short term while everyone is still paying attention. I doubt it in the long term. You may not remember, but there was a little-known software called OpenSSL that had a tiny vulnerability and an exploit called Heartbleed. It was introduced into the software in 2012 and publicly used in 2014, and in the aftermath of that dumpster fire led to the same promises, which obviously kept. But hold on to that happy thought. Regards, Brad.
Oh, that was full of happiness.
All sunshine and bright happy faces. Yes.
Yeah, rainbows, unicorns. Yeah, well, can't disagree.
Someone want to do Highlander?
I can do it. Okay, so this is from listener Highlander. Just wanted to share a story with you guys. A friend loaned me a computer, Lenovo T400. He wanted me to look at it because there was something wrong with it. When I got the machine home and turned it on, it booted into Windows Boot Manager, but not the desktop environment. So I restarted the machine and booted into USB and got FOSS APUP. FOSSAPUP? Anybody heard of that?
Yeah, FOSSAPUP.
Okay.
It's a puppy based on Focal Fossa.
Okay, FOSSAPUP Linux running. Using the desktop environment of FOSSAPUP Linux, I was able to look at the files on the hard drive. Encryption was not used on this hard drive. So I contacted my friend using multimedia service. I was able to show my friend that I had access to the files on his hard drive by sending him one file from his hard drive, see attached. And so begins an interesting exchange. And then he goes on to say, well, Eric, looks like your computer hardware is fine. And that person responded, can you open Windows now? He responded, no, Windows doesn't run. I can, however, see files on the hard drive. Until I contact him in person again, I am not going to change anything on his machine. I recommend that he install a fresh hard drive on his machine and install Windows 10 on the new drive so he can try the system and see if he likes it. His personal data can be transferred over to his new hard drive. Okay, yeah. When he says Windows Boot Manager, so I assume that means it's going to that that sort of boot option screen that nobody really ever sees unless they've jumped through the hoops to...
The dreaded Windows recovery screen.
I don't know if it's the recovery. The Windows Boot Manager does have a grub-like
I think
option
that's
screen that I have not seen it in years. But it's one of those things where you only see it if there's a problem. So I'm thinking there's a couple of things that might be happening here. One is the thing we were talking about on the last episode with the EFI. There being a, the EFI is not set to the right stub file. So go into the EFI settings on what people normally call boot, or the BIOS menu, and make sure that it's set to boot from the correct EFI. And beyond that,
you do the right thing and you take Windows off of that computer.
So
and
that's what I was going to get at.
Distro.
I was trying to, what you're going to want to do is maybe get a new hard drive, maybe not, but
install Mint.
Install Linux Mint, and then transfer said files from that other hard drive over to the home directory of Linux Mint, and just never have these problems again.
All right, watch the smiles appear all around.
Let us know how that goes for you.
Thanks for being in touch, Highlander.
Yes, Highlander, thank you.
It.
I would like you to get in touch directly, maybe on the Discord or an email, and let us know a little bit more details. Because there's possible solutions, but it depends on what exactly is going on here. If you've gotten to that menu and you've tried to go past that menu, what is it actually telling you? Is it just not booting? Is it not telling you anything? What's happening after you select Windows at that boot menu? But yeah, anyway, thank you for the email.
Okay, so now we can move into check this out. First up, I think you got Norbert.
This one's actually mine, Moss.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah, I threw.
You need to mark these things, people.
I know. It was the last minute, but I wanted to throw Gnome Podcast in here. It's not necessarily new. but I was looking for something easy to use on the desktop because we have plenty of players that'll do podcasts in Linux, but devoted podcast players are another thing. And this was a really quick, simple one. It integrates, obviously really well with a GNOME desktop, but it works well in GTK based desktops as well, like Cinnamon. So it's really simple. It's the description is play, update, and manage your podcast from a lightweight interface that seamlessly integrates with GNOME. Podcasts can play various audio formats and remember where you stopped listening, and that's true. I've tried that. You can subscribe to shows via RSS/Atom, iTunes, and SoundCloud links. Subscriptions from other apps can be imported via OPML files. So, yeah, it's not fully complete yet. There's features missing. You can't stream. You have to download. And then oddly enough, there's no way to manually delete the files than to go into the Flatpak folder and go in there and delete them manually. I think otherwise it makes some kind of time-based determination. But I found it really kind of nice, elegant, simple. So if you're looking for something to play mintCast on, maybe, then this could be something for you.
Yeah. So this is different from GPotter.
Yeah, I'm looking at this. It's got an interface much the same as GNOME software, actually, with the way the buttons are laid out.
Yeah, it's the hamburger menu. I mean, it follows their human guidelines set up and all that. And it's a nice, simple app that just kind of does what it says on the tin.
I think GNOME apps in general deserve a shout out because they really, as controversial as the desktop is, I think their GNOME apps themselves are really good.
All right.
When I desktop.
Oh, they are fantastic. I can't say enough about them. They've been solid for me.
Well, I've got a little thing here called PeerGOS, which is an open source replacement for Google Drive, able to be self-hosted or hosted on the company's servers. It's free on their servers up to 500 megabytes and like $5 for 5 gigabytes and $25 a month, or I think it's actually pounds, £5 and £25 a month for 50 gigabytes. And we've been talking about this with Bill since it can be self-hosted for free. Get your hosting out, Bill.
Well, I've never heard of this PeerGOS. Because
I think I recall it being 200 megabytes on the free tier.
Ooh,
I copied it directly from their page.
Was it? I could be wrong. Absolutely. I might have read that wrong.
What would I do with 200 megabytes? Man.
Well, it's free to 500 megabytes on their page.
Okay, I was wrong.
They may have upped it recently and you saw it before that. I don't know.
That's almost an entire 480p movie.
Well, yeah, but look at how much we're using in our now, and we'll probably want to move most of that over. Anyhow, Norbert?
Yeah, I just wanted to. I just put the app outlet that I mentioned last minute into the show notes because I remember watching a video about it. I haven't tried it myself, but it's an app store that can manage snaps, flatpaks, and app images. So I think I think most commonly used app stores like GNOME Software and Discover and others do have support for both snaps and flatpaks, but I don't know another one that can do all three. So in case you are managing all of your native packages with the command line, but would like to have a software center for universal packages, this might be worth a look.
This is actually pretty cool.
We did talk about an app about a year ago that you had to really compile for the distro you're in, and it had a really funky name, and maybe that's why it didn't go anywhere. But I can't find it. I don't remember it. Go ahead, Bill.
No, I was just going to say I'm looking at this right now. I've never seen this before. It's really cool. Of course, they're showing it on a Mac, or, well, at least some sort of theming that resembles Mac. But yeah, this looks like a cool option.
Maybe it's on Elementary. Okay. For announcements, our next episode will be 2 p.m. U.S. Central Time on April 17th, and we have a link in the show notes to get that converted to your time zone. And our next live stream will be 2 p.m. U.S. Central Time on April 9th, and we also have a link to get that converted to your time zone. In wrap-up, Joe couldn't be with us this week, and you can find more of him at tllts.org and linuxlugcast.com. He's on MeWe a bit, jb at mintcast.org to write him a note, and you can buy Joe a coffee by clicking on the link that we have in the show notes. I'm on Full Circle Weekly News, Distro Hoppers Digest, as well as this show. You can email me, bardmoss@pm.me. There are lots of ways to contact me, and you can find them all listed at itsmoss.com. Bill, what about you?
Well, you can get a hold of me at bill@mintcast.org, at least for the time being. I'm Bill H on Discord. I'm at WC Hauser3 on Twitter. And WC Hauser3 on that there Facebook. Also, check out my new podcast. We're about 4 episodes in now. 3ftpodcast.org. We look forward to seeing y'all there.
Norbert.
You can send me an email at norbert@mintcast.org.
What, you don't do anything else? Oh, boy.
Well, like I said previously, I might start a YouTube channel that's in English in the near future. Probably sometime this year.
Watch this
You
space.
have anything in your language?
Well, I do have my YouTube channel, which I still plan to make it active again. It's been inactive for about a year. So if in any case, if someone speaks Hungarian, you can look up Vorvas, but spelled with a Hungarian S, so WALRUSZ. But
okay,
it's not English.
Mr. Thacker.
Yeah, you can get me at jt@mintcast.org, Josh Thacker on Discord, and at metal_foss on Twitter.
And we have that other Josh at joshontech@mintcast.org, at joshontech on Twitter and most other social sites. And you can hear him also on Crowbar Kernel Panic, and we have added him to Distro Hoppers Digest as well. We've got Nishant, who didn't make it today. He's Nishant at mintcast.org. Rycon Ghost on Instagram, Rycon Ghost at GitHub, Ghost.Rycon on Discord, and Maverick00783 at Steam. Before we leave, we want to make sure to acknowledge some of the people who make mintCast possible. Josh Lowe for all his work on the website, Hobstar for our logo, InitRD for the animated Discord logo and time sync, Norbert and Tony Hughes for audio editing of the show, Bytemark Hosting for hosting mintcast.org and our Mumble server, archive.org for hosting our audio files, and the Linux Mint development team for the fine distro we love to talk about. Thanks, Clem.
Thanks, Clem.
Thanks, Clem.
And play closing music and standard outro. 2:39, huh?
Is that good, bad, ugly?
Well, it's better than 3:15.
Yeah. Not bad.
We've had some going over 3:30, I think.
We could have mentioned that we might be looking for editors, as both me and Tony might not be able to do full-time editing.
Well,
I
I think we're going to try and talk to Owen about doing a few things, but we'll figure that out in team meeting. All right, let's close this thing. Save the project. Export the audio.
I'm going to go ahead and stop the stream. Thanks for watching, everybody. Thanks for being a part of this.
Everybody.
Yep. Thank you, everyone.